Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our regular council meeting of Monday, November 25th. I had to do a date check. Anyway, welcome, everyone. I do wish to begin by recognizing that we are meeting on the territory of the Sooke Nation, and we are here tonight with gratitude. So, council, we do have a meeting agenda in front of you, so looking for approval of tonight's agenda as it's presented. Moved by Councillor St. Pierre and seconded by Councillor Beddoes. Any questions? See none. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. Supplementary information. There are some photos being passed around council desks that you'll see here that to go with our second delegation tonight. I think the stacks are the same pictures. Okay. So we'll move straight into our delegation tonight, and tonight we're pleased to welcome our new or newish Staff Sergeant, Brent Sinden, please. Welcome, and if you could please join us at the desk and turn on the microphone so we can all hear you. That'll be great. We have 5 minutes on the agenda for you tonight. Welcome.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here, Your Worship and Council. Moving forward, I'll talk a little bit about how you'd like to see these quarterly presentations made and whether we can get a little more formal with some of the reports that I provide ahead of time instead of just talking. But today I'm just doing a bit of talking. I've been very fortunate to arrive to a detachment that is very full of committed and dedicated members. I've been very impressed with how supportive the community is and the volunteer involvement, and I'm also reaping the rewards of previous commanders' positive relationships with bylaw, fire, and other partners. So it's been a great experience. I want to talk a little bit about our current resource situation, and I'm happy to say that we are fully staffed. That's not something that can be said in an awful lot of detachments around the province right now. As you know, there's 13 District of Sooke members currently on the 70-30 split, as well as 4 provincial positions. And we continue to receive ongoing provincial support through the District General Investigation Section, IDENT Services, Police Dog Services, and West Coast Marine, just to name a few. So we only have those 4 provincial positions, but we are fully utilizing the other provincial resources that are at our disposal. Regionally, we're continuing through the area chiefs to support the Integrated Mobile Crisis Response Team, Mobile Youth Services Team, Regional Domestic Violence Unit, Crime Stoppers, and the Diversity Advisory Committee. I watched Staff Sergeant MacArthur's last 2 presentations, and I thought I'd build on a couple of things that he talked about a little bit. One, he gave you a fairly bleak update on our admin situation in the office last time he was here. Just so you know that 2 of the 4 positions have currently been filled on term assignments while the incumbents are on leave. This has created a steep learning curve for the new staff and put an awful lot of weight on our office manager, but we are making our way through. Part of the stats that have been shared with the monthly report, and why I'd like to move to a more quarterly report to give a bigger slice of time for some more substantive numbers. Some of our internal processes have to develop in that, so some of those admin challenges are holding back that piece. Stats for total call volume, we're on track to a similar overall number of calls as the last 2 calendar years. We're going to come in right around 6,000 calls for service in 2019. To the end of October, the breakdown of district versus provincial calls remains very similar to the staffing ratio, within 1% actually. I'm very cognizant that we're in a rapidly growing community. I'm cognizant of the financial challenges of the district in relation to likely making the change to the 90-10 split in the future. And as our unionization occurs, we're hoping to have some parity with some other forces, so I anticipate that as a financial pressure to you as well. I don't know what kind of reporting has been done to council in the past in regards to our annual performance plan and the measures that we put in place. But I'll just give a very quick review of what was identified before I got here and where we're at. One priority was the priority of enhancing road safety, and our target measure for impaired charges this year has more than doubled what we saw, and we're only at the halfway point. And this is a result of a very proactive group of members and their self-generated enforcement activities. Another area that was identified as a priority was building positive relationships within the RCMP and with our partners. And I'm happy to report we're very active with BC Probation Service. Joint drug project was completed prior to my arrival with Island District General Investigation Section. I have met personally with the Integrated Road Safety Unit, making sure that URSU is giving Sooke the attention that it deserves. They track their stats very carefully, and it's all based on population, and I can assure you that we are getting we're getting our fair share in the CRD here. We've done some proactive work with the West Shore Detachment in mutual areas such as police dog services and sharing information and targeting offenders jointly. There's an awful lot of movement between the two communities, so we've got open lines of communication there. And we've done some joint educational efforts with ICPC. And finally, the other priority that was identified for this fiscal year was a focus on prolific property offenders. Our members have been very proactive in monitoring offenders in the community. I'm a glass half full kind of guy, so I like to say that we give them the structure to allow them to abide by the conditions that are placed on them, knowing we're going to come and check on them. So people that are in our community that are on conditions, rest assured, are being checked. Curfews are being checked, conditions are being checked. And lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about moving forward. It's time to start the planning process for our new annual performance plan, which will come into effect in April of 2020. I'll be reaching out through the district to get some input from you in regards to what you see as priorities for the communities, as well as speaking with our other partners. And I'm also wondering if there's an appetite within council for some type of a protective services committee or something like that, where those priorities could be discussed, and maybe some long-term planning about where policing is going in this growing community. I'd be happy to participate in anything like that. So, and that's all I've got on my paper.
That's great. Thank you very much for coming tonight. And I think this is just a good way for us to get some facts and then just sort of see what sort of information council is looking for. Naturally, when if there were to be an unfortunate major incident, we do like to sort of just have a heads up just in case media calls. So we have a speaking lines, which, you know, which I have always enjoyed and respected and appreciate having in the past. Just so that, you know, we're sort of speaking from the same page when there are those media queries. We haven't had anything, you know, that late of note. The community does always ask, you know, in terms of our growth, you know, and are we preparing for crossing the 15,000? Our staff do have a reserve for us, and also, you know, we sort of wait for those census data. And I think through conversations that we've had, it's the case of the census data is sort of the proof of the 15,000 population, and then, and it's not an assumption, it's basically the census data to back that up. There has been some question about the status of the Vancouver Island Major Crime Unit, and where that is at. At one point, the province did do a lot of outreach on that, and then it just sort of has gone quiet. And it's been a few years since there's been anything sort of materialize. And for the benefit of council, this is almost like an insurance program that a municipality could pay into, so that if there was a major event like a homicide or you know, those are all items that we would need to fund out of a reserve for that sort of investigation. So the VIMQ, as I understood it, would sort of help with some of the cost recovery, but I don't know what the status of that program is. Yeah,
Coming from Sydney or Saanich, they're in the same boat. They're also not in VIMQ. They carry the same risk with financial costs associated to a homicide investigation. I can dig into that a little further for you and report back to you. Certainly the last information that I was given was to encourage our local municipalities to lobby the province, who's actually the gatekeeper for that program.
Okay, and it was the province that did consultation on it. They came out and met, but it was before the last provincial election, and they were doing a lot of consultation. They made a presentation at AVIC, the Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities, and then I remember asking if they had the intent of the new framework in place by the election, and there's sort of been nothing since then, so that's something we could follow.
Yeah, and the election, to my recollection, is the point of time where those discussions stopped. So that,
Yeah, and they haven't really picked up
Yeah.
since. So it's just, as we grow, there could be a more severe incident that occurs within our boundaries. So it just provides us with some options, so we can follow up on that. So I'll just sort of turn to members of council. We certainly appreciate your time. Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, so to the staff sergeant, I know recently for the Tour de Rock, you've had 15 packages of bottles stolen from that Tour de Rock, but what was your impression when the public came through and we were handing cash donations over to the RCMP to make up for that? I was very impressed with what a high esteem the RCMP has held in this community, that they would, the citizens would come out with that sort of support.
Yeah, I was very impressed with the response to the bottle drive before that happened.
Yeah.
And happening in my first 2 weeks at the helm to have a theft from the compound in my backyard was not my favorite thing. However, it certainly had an extremely positive outcome. And just recently, the RCMP Vets Association reached out to make a donation as well.
I
when they heard
understand
about
that,
the
yeah.
story.
So what we're going to do is every year, we're going to have to come and steal 15 bags of bottles. But I just thought that showed, the community really does value the RCMP in this community. So just wanted you to know that.
Yeah, we're very appreciative. Thank you.
Other questions or comments from members of council? Oh, Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, thank you, and welcome to Sooke.
Thank you.
Yeah, you come from Sydney, I understand. So here's this region you have to cover right out to Port Renfrew. What kind of challenges are involved in that?
We have significant challenges based on the size of our detachment, and it's not a 17-mile to Port Renfrew. It's a Royal Jubilee Hospital to Port Renfrew, because we deal with a significant number of mental health calls. So that's the one area that's going up this year, and it takes a lot of our members' time. So we have members regularly at the hospital for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and that's a good outcome. And coming back in the traffic of the CRD. One thing that happened just before my arrival here was a bit of a shift adjustment. We have a lot more bodies working every day than we had before. Our members used to work a 4-and-4 shift, which worked well for them personally, but it didn't work real well for the detachment. They're now working a 5-day on, 4-day off, so we have more bodies every day than we had before, which meets some of those needs, but it's problematic. We have to pick and choose when we can go, where we can go. Sometimes the nature of the call will make that decision for us, but there's some calls out that way that will have to wait. And given the distance and the nature of the road in between, a lot of those calls out there are a 2-member response as well. So on a day where there's not a lot of members around, it's very challenging. Appreciate the question.
Now, just in Staff Sergeant MacArthur's final few meetings, he was shooting from the hip and telling us that he was hoping, over the next 4 or 5 years, 6 new officers might be required to bring you up to necessary speed. Do you feel that you'd like to see these phased in over time, I imagine?
It's a challenge and I appreciate the financial implications to bringing a lot at once. I don't want us to fall behind. I do know that there, in the past, has been a desire around in the chamber here to have 24-hour coverage. We need a pretty big bump to get there. I can't, at my point in my career, come here and just throw the number of 6 out without some data to back it up. However, I'll hang on to that number and I will build the data to back that up.
Finally, the question, I was reading recently that the RCMP and BC are facing some significant budget shortfalls.
Yes.
How is that impacting you here in Sooke?
So that's on the provincial side, and as I said, so that's a small part of our component. It does not have a significant effect so far.
All right, thank
Councillor St. Pierre?
Given the, welcome again.
Thank you.
Given the increase in the number of mental health issues, I was wondering, does your detachment have mental health first aid training? And is that anticipated, or if it's not?
We certainly have what we call crisis intervention de-escalation training, which is was one of the recommendations out of the Jasansky inquiry out of the airport. So all of our members have that. That's a BC thing. So when we bring members from other provinces, they have that training as well. One of the integrated units that I talked about is the Integrated Mental Health Response Team, IMCERT, and we utilize their services with interventions as well.
Is there a coordinated approach to mental health cases? And are there sufficient resources for you to draw on?
The police have a very awkward part of that entire program. We're compelled under Section 28 to apprehend individuals and take them before a doctor. So essentially, where we get involved is the acute crises, which involve us actually taking them to resources. The community capacity to deal with those, I can't really speak to a whole lot yet because it's just the crisis piece, and we certainly have access to resources with the crisis piece through IMCERT. Thank you.
Other questions or comments from councillors? I guess as you work towards your year-end and priority setting and the like, what would be good for council to have is that actual discussion or that data that sort of shows, okay, here's the formula, so many officers per population, and then in terms of meeting community demand or community needs and bringing in additional officers, what does that look like? And how can we look at phasing that in a way that, that doesn't sort of break the budget, but I would not want to see the detachment fall behind and then we pay the added costs because our population went up and then we're not providing the service that our community needs. So I think it's important that we have those conversations, no matter how, whether it's 3 or 6 or 4. But just what does that look like so that we can actually start planning and then considering what the increase in their costs would be, and then also the impact of unionization and what would that look like. I think it's important that we're planning together on this. And then in terms of administrative support, what would that look like? Could we look at a district employee instead of is that an option? Rather than just, because it was a long time when we brought in an additional RCMP administrative, there was quite a long process security clearance. And of course, those are all needed, but is there another way? I think it was at least 2.5 years maybe before the person landed. Is there a way of doing that which would still meet your needs and objectives, but could it be done differently, perhaps, is an option? And then also, as you look to increase the detachment, what about the facility itself? Would there be adequate space in there? What does expansion look like? What do future accommodation needs and the like? Because we're all in this together, so how can we sort of plan for that? It would be better for us to commence planning on that sooner rather than, okay, now we need to find land in a building and do it all at once.
That sounds like the way that the RCMP traditionally does it, but.
Okay, so we're just, like this way, we just have something to work towards in a way that makes sense. We know that we're growing and there'll be challenges with that growth. So I think just the more we can do is the better.
I very much look forward to working through that process with you. I've had the opportunity to command a straight provincial detachment. I was in the number 2 position in Sydney, which is 2 municipalities and a provincial component with municipal employees in the office. So I've seen the good side and the areas of challenges in a lot of different setups. So I certainly have some thoughts and I'm eager to work with you on that.
Okay, and then of course, in the next couple of years, there'll be significant improvements to Highway 14. And from what I recall, some of the challenges that I've heard from members is the existing alignment in the curves and the lack of shoulders make it very difficult to enforce speed in certain sections. Well, of course, if it's a divided highway with shoulders, then it would allow for more enforcement, and then in which case, would that be then a provincial responsibility? And then would you need to increase your complement, because then there would be more enforcement, more expectation of enforcement, and then need for more members in that area. So then, of course, we'd be advocating to the province to fund additional officers for that. But those are all conversations that we'll need to work together on.
Okay.
Excellent. Anything further for our staff surgeon at this point? Councillor Bateman?
Just say that in mention of the Protective Services Committee, that did come up in our discussions today. Big issue for us with committees is that we need the staff support for these committees, and so we can only have a finite number, but definitely in the mix is a Protective Services Committee.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, anything further from yourself?
No, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for being with us tonight. And I'll just look for council to move the recommendation that council receive the RCMP quarterly report dated October 7, 2019 for information. Moved by Councillor Beddoes and seconded by Councillor St. Pierre. All those in favor? Opposed? Is carried unanimously. Great. Thank you very much for your time today. Okay, 7.2 is the Edward Milne Community School Society. And I have a few people, so Councillor Bateman, perhaps you need to just state it for the record.
I will recuse myself.
For conflict of interest
For conflict of interest as a member of the EMCS Society's Board of Directors.
Thank you, Councillor, and
I will also be leaving the room for conflict of interest being a past employee. Thank you.
okay, thank you, Councillor Logans. And we still have quorum, so welcome. And if you could please turn on the microphone.
Okay, I just wanted to take
Sorry,
this
could
opportunity.
you just introduce yourself first?
Sorry? You introduce yourself. My name is Ann Bell. I'm the Community School Coordinator at EMCS. And with me is Sasha Gale, who is the other coordinator, and Steve Anderson, who is the theater coordinator.
Welcome, thank you.
Since I was here last, which doesn't feel that long ago, we've had a couple of fundraisers. The first two events, Valdi, which was split between the Sooke Food Bank, the Sooke Music Festival Society, and the MCS Society, and then Sooke Talks number 3 netted us another $2,900. And the first chair from the student art class fundraiser, a seat for a seat, brought in a $600 donation, $600 donation. So that's two actual chairs that the art students are painting. They're the old chairs, bigger than these ones, fabric, and the kids in the art class have painted works of art on them. So we have silent auction sheets at the school if you'd like to drop in and put a bid on one. The seats are being displayed, and the silent auction sheets are ready for bids. And they actually started the Celebration of Learning event last week. The bids have started, so that's going to be a great fundraiser. The potential is good, and we're hoping to get around $7,000 on that fundraiser alone. There could be as much as 10 if all seats go for the anticipated $300 donation. I've circulated pictures, actual hard copies to you of the damaged theater seats, and they're also showing up here on the TV screen. As you can see, there's fairly significant damage to a number of the seats. Many of them actually have black tape holding them together, the backs of them together. We currently have 122 seats that are in a state of damage, and at least 30% of those are significantly damaged. So not just minor damage, like that picture there would be considered minor. They're fairly significant. So over a third of the chairs in the theater, because it's a 350-seat theater, are damaged. So you can see why it is imminent that we have to address this very soon. The Society is asking that the District of Sooke partner with us to ensure we can purchase the new seats within the next school year. We currently have $43,500 in our fund. The school district is contributing another $50,000, and that will give us $93,500. We're hoping to, as mentioned earlier, the Seat for a Seat fundraiser, we're hoping to get another $7,000 from that. And Steve is looking at bringing in a tribute band in the spring, and we're hoping to net another $5,000 from that particular fundraiser. So that gets us up to about $105,500 in all, counting the school district funding as well as our own. But we're not there because we're looking at the bottom line that we were quoted last year was 120, and it's more now, but it's also more because the seats that would cover, like the ones that they've put in Spencer, and the material is not very thick, it's very thin. So we really want better quality seats than that. At the last council meeting that I was at, when I sat down, one of the women who was sitting next to me turned and she said, "I think the seats at Edward Milne are very comfortable." And I said, "You're right, they are very comfortable, and they're lovely seats. They're just damaged beyond repair now, and we want to ensure that when we replace them with seats that are equally as comfortable as the ones that we've had, and durable, so that they stand the test of teenagers and many, many, many community members using that facility. It is definitely a community hub, so thank you.
Okay, so questions. So right now, the 120 you have, it's been proven that the material just isn't, that's what went into Spencer, so you're looking at getting a new quote, and estimates could be as high as 170 then?
We're looking realistically at 150 is what we're thinking.
Okay, and so at this point, sort of with what you have projected, you're looking for the district, I'm just sort of like, what do we need to consider, like about 45,000?
That would be lovely, you know, if that, yes. I mean, we're not going to say no to anything.
Right.
But yes, you know, I mean, it would be a lovely thing to say the school district contributed close to a third, the society close to a third, and the District of Sooke close to a third, you know. It's never
Yeah.
going to be entirely equal, but that would be a wonderful partnering, certainly, of all of our groups.
Okay, Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, a couple of questions. One is if, let's say, for instance, we can scrub together 45,000 and gave something like a 20,000, would you proceed with a smaller buy? You wouldn't do all the seats? Would that be a plan of action, or it's all or nothing?
It's all or nothing,
Okay.
yeah.
I noticed last time too, and correct me if I'm wrong, I wasn't aware that the District of Sooke, I thought, not District 62, school district, weren't going to contribute anything in the beginning. Was that correct, or did this just change the 50,000 from them?
They confirmed that indeed they would contribute.
Okay, because there was some
It was never nothing, but there was no amount. And
Yeah.
the Secretary Treasurer, just before I met with you at the last meeting, he confirmed, I think it was that day, that they would contribute.
Yeah, because that was
50.
always bothering me. Always bothering me was the fact that you know, it's sort of their school, and they weren't ponying them. I know they pony up lots of other money, so I'm very pleased to see that part of it. That helps me in where we go from here. Okay, thank you.
Other questions from members of council? Councillor St. Pierre?
I was just curious, given that there seem to be 2/3 of the seats that are probably not in great repair, and I understand that end of life means that, it's kind of like your old car, things are going to start breaking down faster. Is that the idea behind replacing them all at once, or I guess I'm wondering, why is there not an option to, for example, have seats to the side or some other sort of arrangement that would allow you to retain some of the seats that might still be more lightly used, but just curious.
That's a good question, and it's certainly one that we also asked, why could we not take all the broken seats out and then put all the new seats and have sections? But that is apparently what they did to try and mitigate the problem at Spencer Middle School. And what they found happened was they would replace a section and then the seats would change. And then they had this higgledy-piggledy marrying up of different sizes of seats that didn't work. So the school district has made it pretty clear that we should be doing this as an all or nothing, because fabric colors change, sizes of chairs change, and yeah, we did ask that question. It's a good question, yeah.
So at this point, so we had received a few delegations over the course of the year on this and had requested some more information each time, just to sort of advance and to prepare for a decision. So this is sort of our opportunity to glean as much as we can from Ms. Bell on this. We're seeing the facts of the wearing out seats within here. It is a community school, community theater, and in a previous delegation, which is here, it sort of outlined the use. It's not just the school that uses the theater, but of course there's a wide range of community events that also access the theater regularly. Anything from awareness night movies to other community type events like all candidate forums, for example, and the like. And so there's a wide range here. So I do feel that that it's something that I'm comfortable finding some funds for. I just don't know how much, and I think that'll sort of answer itself within our budget deliberations. We've gone through a service review, an organizational review, a strategic planning process, work plan review, all of that, and then it's a case of where does that put us in terms of budget. In this case, it is a community asset, so I just don't know right now if we can set an amount, but I don't want to say, come back in a year, because you've been coming to us multiple times, and we really just need to answer this question when we enter into budget deliberations in December, unless somebody is comfortable with an amount, or what do you need to derive an amount? What I'm hearing is anything up to a third, that anything helps, and ideally they would look to us to be a third partner. We heard EMCS is 43,500 plus more. So let's say, just given the fundraising initiatives you have, you're about at 50,000. SD 62 is 50,000. That leaves them about 50 and a bit shy short, depending on where that final quote is. And of course, more fundraising is ongoing as you have planned. Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, just on the timeline, I think you heard that we're talking about budgets now. I think there's some incentive for us to help, all right, but we can't really commit to how much. Would it really upset things if you've got an answer, a dollar amount in like early in the new year or late December?
Not at all.
That would still work with your plans?
Yes.
You're not going to be proceeding with this?
Yep.
Okay, because then that works in well. We can talk about it in our budgets and see how much or if we can come up with something.
So
that
maybe
fair?
for staff to be able to plug something in, if you put, I'm just curious, I'm just throwing something out there
Yeah.
just so we can advance this. If we were to be, let's say, funding 45,000, I'm not saying that we would follow, I'm just curious if that got entered in. I would just like to see how that plays out with the budget.
Your worship, would you like to see that itemized or part of a council contingency, or does it really matter?
I think it's sort of a one-off, right? So for me, council contingency is sort of say, a set amount every year that council draws from. This is like a one-off, and then I think it would come back in, say, 15 or 20 years, depending on the use of the theater. This is one-off capital investment in our community theater. And so it would almost like sort of need to be a sort of one-off line item. I think just for future councils to be able to track is like, why was council contingency so high in one year and then it disappeared? Whereas if there was a line that said community theater investment or something, or capital theater investment, then it would show up there, and then when you look back, you would identify it. So in 15 years, if we're like, okay, we need to start saving for those seats again, then how does that conversation unfold in years to come? Councillor Battles?
Yeah, I'd also like to see what that impacts on the taxpayers at
Yeah.
$40,000, what is it? 0.5%. So, that is significant in itself, but I think I'd be happy with staff looking at some of the ramifications of it, so we got something to go by.
Yeah, I would just like to see something in there as opposed to we get to it and then it's like, oh, shoot, we're here and now we better put something like back up again, right? So that you have something to start with and then we can sort of play with it with a defined line description. Councillor St. Pierre?
I don't know if this is more or less what you're asking as well, but I'm curious about if there's anything other than contingency that might be more appropriate, and
Yeah.
maybe just get something back from staff on that.
Through your worship, so on our meeting, I believe it's December 5th, is our first budget presentation, so I can just kind of include something in there and describe the impact to property taxes based on that, and look at other options potentially, so that can kind of be part of our December 5th budget discussions.
Yeah, that would be great. And then I think if we have an opportunity, I don't know what exists for grant opportunities out there. Maybe if it's not even a government grant, is there anything through Telus, Shaw, Fortis, any of these sectors that may qualify? I don't know. It depends. They have very set criteria, but if we're all looking, we may find something that could help offset this as well. I don't know.
We did look at the Rick Hansen Foundation, particularly for accessible seating, because again, that's an issue in that theater. There is no accessible seating, and there needs to be, and that too will be addressed throughout this whole issue, but they have no grants available right now. So we need to keep looking, and we are actively looking at
Okay.
what might be out there in the way of grants, but there doesn't seem to be a lot for that type
Yeah.
of,
So I guess the other question is with this, so it's not just the fabric, but it's like the entirety, like the whole the folding I don't know what you call it, the hardware of the seats and everything will all come out and then new come in. Does that change your seating capacity at all?
The only thing that will change this seating capacity is bringing in the accessible seating. So we will have to have 2 or 3 at least spots within that theater for somebody to bring in a chair or whatever needs people have to be able to access. Right now, people just have to sort of roll in the door and sit right at the very top. There is no accessible seating, so it could take away a little bit of seating. It's $350 now. It may go as low as $345, but it won't change it that much.
Okay. And I think part two is as you examine the accessibility, it would be nice if there was accessible seats that were in a nice place as opposed to like, oh, we'll put them in the back corner.
Exactly, yes.
Or in the very front row, there must be a mid-range option available somehow. But I'll leave that to your sort of engineering or planning to make that call there.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else from anyone? So I guess at this point, what sort of a resolution would staff be looking for so that we could capture this in the budget deliberations?
Just something along the lines to include it in the December 5th presentation.
Okay, so that council directs staff to include consideration of funding the MCS theater seats in the amount up to $45,000 for the preliminary budget discussions? or December 5th budget, or do you like a date, or?
Yes, so then you'll see an overall impact on taxation from the 45, and if we have to cut back from what the total amount is, we can talk about that whole package.
Okay. So is someone comfortable moving that? Moved by Councillor McMath, seconded by Councillor St. Pierre. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, is carried unanimously. So it's not final, but we want to start with something.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much for hearing me again.
Thank you for returning. We appreciate that, and also for the photos. And so we do have some sets, and we have the videos, so you may want to keep these just for, you may need them for other.
We've kept one set, so if you want to keep one, then we've got
Well, we should
couple.
have them just in case
Yeah.
people ask us on the 5th
Yeah.
about the state of the seats, and we can say, look, we have the
exactly.
documents.
You
Okay.
actually have hard copy proof. Thank you.
Oh, I have a set here, so there's. No, so Councillor Lajeunesse can return his.
Bring people back in?
Oh, we do have the electronic ones, so I think that's,
Bring them back in.
okay. Actually, Ms. Bell, I'll return these, because we do have the electronic set on the screen, so that's probably, yes, you have them for safe handling, but thank you for bringing them. Okay. Okay, so we'll move on to our third delegation here, and this is for BC Housing. Mr. Malcolm McNaughton is here tonight. McNaughton, is that correct? And right off, just given the intent of his delegation tonight, there is a recommendation from staff that council extend the delegation time for BC Housing to 15 minutes, moved by Councillor McMath and seconded by Councillor Bateman. Any discussion? This way we're not interrupting our delegation through the presentation, but we still need you to, it's always good to be concise. Anyway, all those in favor? Opposed, is carried unanimously. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I will keep it concise. I've given this presentation a few times over the last few months. I actually just gave it last Sunday at the BC Nonprofit Housing Association, where they asked me to do it for an hour and a half. I got through it with a room of about 70 people and all the questions in 45 minutes, so this should be no problem. If I can just do this. So the role of BC Housing is really about the creation of affordable rental properties across the spectrum across all of BC. My role with BC Housing is I'm the Director of Development for Vancouver Island. Some of you may also know my counterpart, the Director of Operations, Heidi Hartman. And so our territory matches that of the Vancouver Island Health Authority. So we match up because we do a lot of work with them as well. So as you can see here, we look for partnerships, partnerships in both government and nonprofits and the private sector. We have the housing spectrum. On the left of the housing spectrum, you will see what we call our Building BC funds. These are the funds that were announced by the NDP government in February of 2018. And you'll see as we go further along, there's 4 funds that were created from that. And really, those funds are about addressing homelessness, women fleeing violence, Indigenous housing, and seniors and families. So those are the 4 broad categories. On the right-hand side of the spectrum is called the Housing Hub, and what that is a mechanism to utilize our financing through Treasury Board with the private industry, with private sector developers. And so what we do is we use our construction financing to buy down the finance rate and use that to apply it to lower rents or to affordable home ownership. And so what that does is it's not deep affordability that we have in the subsidized programs in the Building BC, but it's a supply side. So try and get more supply into the marketplace, because unlike places like Sooke and Langford, we actually have a hard time getting stuff built in other places. And so that's really what that is about, is trying to provide some incentive into the marketplace to get more housing built. And so you'll see a little bit more of that as we go forward. So the Housing Hub, what it provides is basically partnerships with the development side, and really what it does is it's like, 10% of the units might be 10 or 15% below market, and we secure that with a covenant. And so what really happens is that over the long term, those those units stay affordable even after the covenant is gone, as long as people don't move, because we have rent controls in BC, and so as long as people are there, their rent is going to stay affordable as long as they're in those units. We also help developers. We've got quite a few on the island, a lot of them up towards Nanaimo, Campbell River, Courtenay, and we provide access to pre-development funding, and we also provide coordination and basically education to councils and staff as to what is being proposed, why it's good for the community, just in terms of the socioeconomic pieces of bringing more rental supply in. So what we look at here is the average income, so 70 to 150,000. Just a real quick snapshot of this. You think, oh, 150,000, that's a lot of household income for something that's supposed to be affordable. Well, really what it is you've got people that are building towers and large buildings, and when you get high up into those buildings, you have to have enough income to be able to support what the cost is of buying those units. So when we did the Vivid building, which is with Chard down on Yates Street, downtown Victoria, we went up to 125,000. We had very few people that actually had that income. What we really had was we had about 80% of the folks that had about a $75,000 annual household income. So we actually hit what we were looking for in terms of the overall income levels in the program. And what it did was it allowed those folks to take a step up the rung on the housing ladder. And what that does is that creates space for other folks to move up the housing ladder. And so what's happened with low interest rates, high demand is people with money have been able to push down, they've been pushed down as costs have gone up, have been pushed down the housing ladder, if you will, and so that's just an opportunity to move back up. So what that program did for, that's a home ownership program on Yates with Chard, is it allowed about 100 rental units to be created through a vacuum of people leaving their rental units without actually having to build anything. So we helped finance a new condo that was affordable, so helped those folks and basically created space in the market. So that's really what the housing hub is for, is creating a supply side of the equation. Now, just give me a second here, I'll have a drink and we'll get into the community housing fund. The community housing fund is really the bread and butter of what the majority of our units that we're going to be producing over the next 10 years. It's a 10-year program, 14,350 units, almost $2 billion. And so what this program is for families and seniors. And so this is deep subsidy. We've got 30% of moderate, which really is like 80% of CMHC average rents. So average rents are typically much lower than actual market rents because it includes all of the people that have been paying rent and that have been renting for quite some time. You have 50% rent geared to income, so that's 50% of the folks in these units will pay 30% of their household income towards their rent, and 20% of deep subsidy, which is $375 a month, which is the provincial shelter rate. So you have 70% of the units at a very deep subsidy. So that's the left-hand side of the housing spectrum that we're talking about, and this is the vast majority of the units that we're going to be building over the next 10 years. We typically do that with nonprofit housing providers. So we're not, for this program, we're not a top-down organization. This is where the nonprofits in the community, like Knox Vision Society, come to us. They apply in a request for proposals that we'll send out, and it's a competitive process. And so we look at the project itself, we look at the need in the community, and we also look at their operational capacity and operational plan because we basically are subsidizing these units for 60 years. So it also has to be very sustainable both financially and environmentally and operationally over that time frame. Oops, sorry. So the Indigenous Housing Fund is $550 million over 10 years, 1,750 units. This fund is well oversubscribed. We had, I don't remember the total number, but the first cut that we did as regional directors, we wanted to do more than the program allowed. We had that many good projects come in the last call. And so what I always say to folks is, please lobby your MLAs, ask for more money in this program. This is something that we can, and I don't like to get into too many politics, but this is something that we have absolutely see a need throughout the community. This is for both on and off reserve. And really, it's something that we should be doing more of. It's something that a federal government has let us down on, and it's something that we actually need to take some responsibility for, which is what the government did in their February budget of 2018. One of the differences between this and the community housing fund is this is 100% rent geared to income. So no matter where you're at from a household income standpoint, you're going to pay 30% of your household income in rent. And it's got a little bit more upfront money as well in terms of the dollars. And it's got money basically allowed in there for cultural art items and design items that are culturally appropriate. So. Supportive Housing Fund. This is the one that gets all the news. This is the one that gets all the headlines. We have just about finished up our rapid response to homelessness, which was the first modular program that was 2,000 units that was rolled out in September of 2017. I think I have the last unfinished one in the province at Evergreen Terrace that we just broke ground on. So hopefully we'll be wrapping that up early in the new year. This fund may be modular or stick-built. It's 2,500 new homes. Over the 10 years, it's for people that are homeless and homeless at risk. It's 24/7 supports. It's wraparound services. We do a lot of partnering again with VHA on this. This is one that is actually owned by BC Housing, and we did an EOI, expression of interest for operators province-wide, and so we've identified operators that we can draw upon, but this is one where we actually own the land and actually go out and basically hire the nonprofit operators to operate it. And what that does is that gives us a little bit more control over what's actually going on in the operations of the building, and hopefully also helps when we have problems in the neighborhood, et cetera, as well. Women's Transition Housing Fund. This one is also a very important one, especially here on the island. On the island, we actually have a tremendous need for more women's transition facilities. We've got one that we've started in Langford. I'm looking at another one in Victoria. I've got about 10 altogether on the island that we're actually starting on already, so quite busy on that. And there's basically the four models. You've got safe home, transition house, second stage housing, permanent housing. What we're really seeing is we're not doing a lot of transition houses. We're doing a couple here and there as the need is, but really a lot of second stage housing and a lot of on the third stage permanent type housing. Because of the housing crisis, women who are coming out of second stage facilities, coming out of transition homes, don't have places to go that they can afford and that are size appropriate with bedrooms, etc. So it's to be able to go out and actually be able to rent a 2 or 3 or 4 bedroom place is really important. So, and again, this is similar to the Supportive Housing Fund, where BC Housing owns it and selects the operators through an EOI process. Just wanted to highlight the Regional Housing First Partnership. It's a unique one. It's the only one like it in the province. BC Housing and the Capital Regional District each put in $30 million. Then we drug CMHC to the table and got another $30 million. We've got one building that's complete. We've got a total of about 900 units underway. The idea of this is to basically create 400 shelter rate units for folks that are at risk of homelessness. A lot of what we're seeing is people that are coming out of supportive housing that can now live on their own, potentially with some light supports from VHA, kind of on a weekly basis, that they can live in this housing. And so we've got a couple projects out here in Sooke that we're going to be working on over the next couple of years, so that's moving along. And really it's a mix of housing. It's a mix of housing from again, kind of that middle income range all the way down to the shelter rate. So total, that's a little outdated. This was back in September. I think I was supposed to be here and put these numbers together. So we're over 900 now, and we've got very good coverage all over the regional district, except for the peninsula, which we're working really hard to get some projects there. It's a little challenging because their land is very limited. That's it. Now we have questions. 2 minutes.
Okay, no, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. There's a lot of information, but we can also find it online as well. I think some of the questions we just recently completed our own housing needs analysis, and that was done because we wanted something for Sooke in particular. And we're aware that the provincial government is going to be doing another intake for housing in the springtime.
Yes.
We also have our property that we'll be sending out for an EOI proposal. And then given that we had the Knox Vision project complete, and then we have our 244 units to break ground soon, I guess, do we hit a saturation point? Like and yet we do know that there is still a need for more housing. We have seniors that are on, that was sort of identified in our housing needs analysis, as well as young families. Do we run a risk of, we're just home, I'm sort of not being able to gather my thoughts particularly. Is that it for us, or do we still have opportunity available? We're a growing community, we're one of the best places to live, but we also have growth with challenges, and I just want to make sure that we position ourselves appropriately for the needs of our community.
So I think really going back to your housing needs analysis and really being able to show a clear need in the community for the type of housing that you're proposing, and really showing a linkage between that type of housing and how it fits with what your need is in the community is going to be important. I think also having a good quality operator on board. In our last RFP, 40% of the scoring was just about who the operator was. So you had about 40% that was on the capital budget on the development side of things. Has the property been rezoned? How far along in the process is it? How certain is this to be able to move forward? So there's about 40% on the development side of things and about 40% on the operation side. And then you've got kind of 20% that is really about, the partnerships and meeting the need in the community, et cetera.
And then how far along in the process would we have to be if the application opens up in spring? And I don't know that we would clear a rezoning in that time period, so.
No, the RFP will open in the spring, but it probably won't close until, if we do it the same way we did last time, and we haven't confirmed dates yet, is sometime in early September. And so you've got quite a bit of time, and so you've got an opportunity to do that. And it's not always about necessarily having it all done. It's also about just being able to show a good path and be able to show, support for it, et cetera. When we get, a lot of what we get is, strong letters of support, whether it's from, if a nonprofit is coming in and we've got strong letters of support from a council that says, this is part of our OCP, we plan to, move forward with this. Those types of things are very helpful to us in our scoring. It doesn't have to all be done.
Okay. Questions from members of council? Councillor St. Pierre?
I was just curious about the supportive housing and the transition housing. Is it also integrated? I know you're using a mixed market model so that, it's not, for example, all Indigenous or all of one particular socioeconomic demographic. Are you looking at a mix? And I think that the project on charters is also using that kind of a model. So what happens with the supportive and transition? Because I know there's good models where people that need additional support are integrated into, for example, a building that has, people that don't need those supports, but, there might be staff on hand that serve, half a dozen or more people that do need those supports. So I'm just curious about that.
So typically under the supportive housing fund, it is really for folks that are street entrenched homeless, and so they typically need the 24/7 supports. So typically our size is 45 to 55 units in a single building, or as part of a much bigger building if we're in a metro area. But typically they're standalone facilities. Typically, and part of that is twofold. One is operationally to be able to, we'd like to integrate them into neighborhoods, but we'd like them to be able to be standalone. Part of that is the ownership requirement that we have, because typically the other parts of the building are then operated by a nonprofit, and typically what we find in the industry, if you will, is that the folks that are providing supportive housing are not the same folks that are providing just regular affordable housing, and so trying to get them to meet and match is a real challenge. So On the supportive housing side, we don't tend to see a lot of mixing. And then on the women's side of things, definitely the transition homes are standalone facilities. They are very secure, they're very innocuous, and we don't advertise them very much in terms of where they are or how they get built. But in terms of the second stage, little less innocuous, but still very secure facilities, a lot of septed type stuff that goes into it. And so it's really when we get to more third stage and that type of thing that we start mixing them. Typically those women's facilities, they're looking for a lot of security. They want to feel comfortable. They don't necessarily want to be just mixed in general terms of population where people can just easily get at them. And so those two types generally aren't mixed in. From an Indigenous standpoint, really I'll give you an example. We did one in Nanaimo where it was I think 32 or 35 unit townhomes, and it was Indigenous based, but there's non-Indigenous folks that live there as well. So it's really up to the operator of how they want to mix it and how they want to do it. Yeah.
Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, thank you for the report and the update and the clarity about how we can move forward. Now, our housing needs assessment does very clearly indicate a number of key points. 82% of households in the region will not qualify for a mortgage for a single-family detached home. Only 59% of households pass the affordability test for a three-bedroom rental. 23% can't qualify for a bachelor with a $900 rent. And I think one of the key points in the study, by 2026, it's felt that we need as many as 350 non-market housing units. So thank you for bringing in 244, as well as the Knox vision, another 40, I believe. So if we were to come to you with a vision and some secure zoning and a partner, nonprofit, like a McCullough Housing, whose Kevin Albert was here a few weeks back expressing interest, does the municipality also have to donate the land? Is that a key piece of the puzzle?
That definitely helps.
Yeah.
That's a, because again, it comes back to how do we stretch our dollars as far as we can, and how do we get, we have targets for this, but I can tell you with, the 2 years ago when this program was designed, we've seen construction costs, rise over 20% since then. So, anything we can do to make that bottom line better is going to certainly help. And I think the other thing too is to just also keep in mind that those time horizons and being able to absorb into the market. So when you say that by 2026 you need 350, what does that look like in terms of the build out and how does that work? And just from a timing standpoint. And so from the discussions that I've had with staff is it seems like the timing might work out fairly well. So that would be a good thing. And I think the other thing, just kind of the general message that I try and take, because I'm an urban planner by training and have worked at one as minimally as I can, because most of my work is on the development side. But, again, it's about how do you actually enact your OCP? And you go to a lot of communities that are only enacting, 70-75% of their OCP when they go to do zoning because they feel a lot of pressure from the neighbors and everything else. And so it's not any one thing that's put us into this housing deficit. It's a whole number of things, and we have to address all of those things along the way. So when you have just general development applications in front of you, be looking at things that say, okay, how do you get to that OCP number, and how do you maybe, work with a housing hub and get something affordable in it, or it doesn't have to be a deep affordability, but how do you get to that supply issue? Because at the end of the day, if you let developers overbuild, they will. And that's actually what helps the supply issue. That's what helps the dollar, because they're going to have to rent those apartments out. They're not going to be able to let them sit empty.
Can I
Follow up, Councillor Bateman,
thank you
then
for
Benners.
that. I also note that there's been some quite creative social housing projects. I note there's one in Kelowna with a 6-lane bowling alley is part of the project, which is an amenity for the residents. you're open to, one of the ideas that's being floated here is we're a community that's increasingly known for our co-housing projects. And I don't know if you're familiar with the co-housing model, you undoubtedly are. Would the Regional Housing First program entertain a co-housing concept?
Probably not the Regional Housing First model, because it's a little bit of a different model, but certainly under the Community Housing Fund, which is different. The Community Housing Fund is just a straight BC housing fund. The Regional Housing First program that I was mentioning is the CMHC, CRD, VHA partnership that we have, and it's got some very specific requirements around it. Yeah, no, we're interested. The one that you mentioned in Kelowna, the reason it has a bowling alley in it is the person who donated the land required that it have a bowling alley for the resident, because it's a seniors project, and so they wanted that to be the amenity that was done there. So there's you hear these things, but there's always a story behind the story, right?
Thank you.
Councillor Beddoes, then St. Pierre.
Yeah, I have one question. If like a McCullough type development came here in Sooke, would that come out of the Indigenous funds?
No, not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
No, the interesting thing is that the Indigenous, the folks like McCullough, although that's their focus, they can apply to any one of these funds.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so they're not limited. They can use any one of them, and they can serve Indigenous folks within any one of them. We just as a policy put forward funds that were directed directly towards Indigenous housing.
Okay. Well, that answered my question, because I know it said the Indigenous fund was oversubscribed.
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily stuck to that fund, so they can go through a broader picture.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, it's one of the conversations I've had with Kevin Albers is that, don't just limit yourself to that, apply across the board. And McCullough actually was one of the folks that we did an RFP for operators of the Sooke and Drennan site that we have, and so they're one of the folks that actually applied for that as well under the RHFP. So they can work under many of those. But again, they're give you an example. They don't do supportive housing. So again, you wouldn't see them working in that area.
Councillor St. Pierre.
I'm very interested in your housing hub and just the idea of actually creating more units, honestly, maybe at a lower cost, so you can actually increase the supply and pull people up. If we had developers that were interested in hooking up with that, or if we have projects that were already even fair ways into it, how would you actually get the two together? And
Just
how
call me, email me. I'll get them together.
Alrighty.
Other comments or questions from members of council? Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, I'm curious about those two projects. Do you have timelines at this point? Or?
I'm not the project manager. I have some broad timelines, but yeah, no, we're hoping to get underway this summer on the first one. So, yeah.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time with us tonight, and safe travels back, and we look forward to being in touch with you in the new year.
Thank you.
Yes,
No, I'm going to try and avoid the police on the way home. Okay. I just would say that, just if I may, one quick thing. Again, thank you very much, and I look forward to working with staff up until the point that the call opens. Once the call opens, I have to exit the process, so I'm just looking forward to working with staff until then to try and help you get the best project together.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. And the comment was made because we saw our staff sergeant putting his coat on, so I can walk you. Thank you very much. Okay. All right, council, so that concludes our delegation portion this evening. So our next item is item 8, report of the Chief Administrative Officer. Mr. McInnes.
Thank you, Worship. Quick report tonight. I reported a week ago tonight, so on the 18th. So since then, been working with the Acting Director of Finance to work out the first draft of the 2020 budget. And we've also met with all of the departments, and I think we're getting close to being prepared to present to Council on December 5th. I've reviewed a number of current and expired agreements with Chief Mount on various fire services, and most of them are in good shape. There's a few that you can anticipate seeing in front of Council in the short term. I had lunch with the CEO from Langford, and they are embarking upon a tourism plan. And we met to see if there's any synergies that Langford and Sooke may share in that tourism spot, and I think there probably is. And on Friday, we had a candidate in town for the Director of Operations. This was the third and final interview, and be making a decision tomorrow whether we offer or actually go back to the market on that position. So we'll be making that decision tomorrow. And lastly, from our meeting that we had on November 7th, we've now included 2 additional things in the Council strategic plan. So the next items are 1.4, improve communication engagement with public and community partners, and 2.6, identify and plan for green infrastructure opportunities. That's my update.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. McInnes. Item 9, public question and comment period. So this here is available for all items on tonight's agenda, is that correct? Or is there anything that we can't get any further feedback on? I just want to always ask that now. Just verify this.
Through your worship, there would be no further communications on the bylaw 747 that's up for adoption tonight on Kaltassin. That's already been to public hearing.
So 12.2, because that public hearing is closed already.
That's
Okay,
correct.
so that's the only one?
That's correct.
Okay, so otherwise, there's all other items. If members of the public have comments or questions on any of the items, please come forward. We just require your name, and if you could let us know which agenda item you wish to speak with, too.
Ellen Lord. There's a couple of agenda items I'd like to speak to. The delegations, the RCMP report, is great to see that we're now looking at a list there for showing mental health issues, and I see that it's very high, and I'm glad that Councillor St. Pierre brought that up as well. That it's now it's being logged how many mental health issues, but I'd like to know how many calls of the other calls are actually related to mental health. I think it's good to have that knowledge for the district to use our resources wisely as to where to put our resources. Another one, with the chairs for the EMCS, is there not a possibility of recovering those chairs?
Like using the old chairs?
Using the same chairs, but recovering them.
We've had that conversation through the delegation. My understanding is that the hardware is also compromised in many of the chairs as well, and with the tears and the like, that it's not salvageable. That was sort of the information that I got from a previous delegation.
I'm just curious to know
Yeah.
if there's some that are compromised, that could be, but if there's just a few, recovering just seems to be a much more financially feasible way to do that with good fabric. The other one, also with the police, when they are called for mental, are they called for mental issues? If they have issues that are mental issues, the sergeant was saying that they have to deal with them, take them to a place. But do we have a place close? Where is that the trips all the way to? Yes, I know, all the way to Jubilee, and I think that that's really something, again, that we need to address. That's why all along I've been saying, why do we not know how many mental issues we have? Because that also is addressed in homelessness many times. Another question I have is in regards to the firearms bylaw, and why is it only applying to ALR land? Because most of the farmers in this region are not on ALR land, for your information. I think there's maybe just 2, as a matter of fact, maybe 3, that have ALR land. And the other question is, why is it for 2 hectares and over for use of firearms and bow?
Okay, so I'll make a note of that, and we can address that when we get to that section.
Okay, and was there something else? Nope, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lors. Yes, Councillor Loggins?
Thank you. Just wanted to quickly note about the mental health issues being brought with an RCMP officer over to Royal Jubilee. It was a couple years ago now that I was on the Victoria Family Court and Youth Justice Committee, and they were looking into that, but I believe it is just the case that across our region, it's standard that that's the procedure for dealing with those situations. I'm not sure if the committee has been looking into what other options might be available, but I think if they do come up with a solution, it will be a long-term plan.
That's true, Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, as the current appointee to the Victoria Family Court, yes, I can confirm that there's a lot of wishing and hoping for West Shore facilities now that the West Shore is growing so rapidly. The Sexual Assault Center and the Youth Mobile Services, the RCMP have, and a number of other localized services in the West Shore.
It's the same where health services are located. Why is it that a Sooke resident needing dialysis has to go all the way to Royal Jubilee on Handy Dart? Because that's just the way the service exists right now for our community. It's unfortunate that Handy Dart won't go to the one in Saanich, but that's just the reality of our situation right now and health in general. Okay. Any other members of the public here tonight have anything to speak about on tonight's agenda? Anything but 12.2. Not seeing any movement, so we'll move on. Thank you very much. Into our consent agenda, item 10.1, and that is here that the correspondence received from November 5th, 2019 to November 17, 2019 be received for information.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Bateman, seconded by Councillor St. Pierre. Any questions, comments? All right, all those in favor? Opposed is carried unanimously. Item 11.1, age-friendly grant application. And there's a report with a recommendation. Anything further from staff to add to the report?
Nothing, Your Worship. Prepared to answer questions if there are any.
Questions, Councillor St. Pierre? Okay, well, we'll do the first part then, or I'll read it. Can we do these together? Okay, so that is that council support a grant application to the Age Friendly Communities 2020 program to provide local engagement to seniors that will holistically inform the implementation of future transportation and traffic safety capital works from the Transportation Master Plan, and that council directs staff to provide overall grant management. Moved by Councillor St. Pierre and seconded by Councillor McMath. Questions or comments from anyone on the motion? Seeing none, Councillor
Well, I
Bateman.
just wanted to state that on Wednesday afternoon at the community hall, there will be a special session on accessibility in Sooke. And that follows up on, there was a study done back in 2008. Councillor Lajeunesse was on that committee. And I think it's from 2 to 6.
2 to 6 in the dining room.
In the dining room.
In the dining room of the community hall, and this is.
I hope those hours are right. I could be wrong.
We can confirm that, but just, it's different from 1 to 6.
Okay.
1 to 6, I'm hearing, and this is in response to, oh my goodness, 1 to 4, remove the 2 and the 6. It's 1 to 4 in the community hall this Wednesday. This is in response to Minister Simpson's work on accessibility throughout the province, one of the engagement sessions. Different from this, but same sort of host. Age-Friendly Committee is doing the work there. Okay, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. 11.2, Development Permit 6671 Wadham's Way.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. The purpose of this report is to request approval from council for a development permit application that would permit development of a library on the district-owned lands, formerly or informally known as Lot A, and municipally addressed as 6671 Wadham's Way. The applicant is Vancouver Island Regional Library, and their representatives are present should council wish to address any questions directly to them after this staff presentation. The site's located at the rear of Evergreen Mall, behind the Western Foods on the south and on the south side of Wadham's Way between Anna Marie and Townsend Roads. The total of Lot A is approximately 5 hectares in size, but the development area for the library is approximately 3,951 square meters in size. The site is located on the development site is located on the northwest corner of Lot A, across the street from Sooke Family Resource Center and Wadham's Farm property. To the east and west of the property are single-family residents zoned R1 along Townsend and Anna Marie Road, and the adjacent mall site is zoned C2 General Commercial. Within a 1-block radius east of the property on the southwest corner of Wadham's and Church is the recently constructed mixed-use building known as the Knox Church development. It's 42 units of residential above some first-floor commercial. The Wadham's Farm property, denoted in beige on the screen, that's zone CD 14, and it currently has an application in for zoning and development of 133 residential units. The gray dotted dots along the frontage of the south side of Wadham's Way denotes a 3-meter wide multi-use pathway that exists. And there are 2 BC transit stops within 300 meters of the site, one on Otter Point and one on Church Road, denoted by the small bus icons on the screen. In terms of policy context, the site falls within the town center land use designation and the town center DP area of the official community plan, and as such is subject to the town center plan and design guidelines. It's zone P2 community facilities in the Sooke zoning bylaw. The details of the applicable guidelines and regulations are addressed in 3 pages of the council report, some of which I'll be addressing in the following slides. So in terms of access and servicing, a 6-meter wide access road or driveway will be constructed at approximately the midpoint of the frontage on Wadham's Way. It will be an all-turns access. A left turn lane will be installed on Wadham's Way. The access road driveway will be flanked along its west side with a 1.8-meter concrete sidewalk for north-south pedestrian connection. The access road will have an 8% slope upon entry that ends just before the drive aisle into the parking lot. This is a result of an approximate 2-meter drop in grade from the street level at Wadham's Way, as illustrated in the top right corner of the screen. The grade differential is addressed through retaining walls on the northwest corner of the development site, per the cross-section shown on the lower right corner of the screen. The sanitary and storm connections will be provided off of Wadham's into the site. Drainage will be addressed through use of boulder-lined bioswales in the northeast corner of the site, along with the south property line. Further details regarding engineering can be found in the report package and have been reviewed and endorsed by engineering staff. At time of building permit, a site-specific stormwater management plan and geotechnical report will be required. Unfortunately, this should show up as color when I sent it in, but it looks like a lot of the color has drained for the purposes of the television, so my apologies. So this is a more detailed landscape plan. Pedestrian connections, as mentioned previously, will exist via the 1.8-meter sidewalk on the eastern edge of the property, along with additional patterned concrete walkway from the parking areas into the lower entrance and from the emergency stairwell. Landscaping is designed to take advantage of sun exposure with minimal shadowing and utilizes drought-tolerant natural species. The site's surrounded by landscaping at a minimum of 1 meter in depth from property line. There are approximately 34 trees proposed for the site, a combination of maple, birch, and oak, along with numerous large and small shrubs, perennials, annuals, and ferns. The landscape plan was reviewed and endorsed by the head of parks. Prior to DP issuance, a landscape estimate must be submitted for approval to the head of parks, and a landscape agreement entered into with 110% bonding, provided which will include all soft and hard landscaping, including the cedar fence, but would not include parking surface. From the edge of the multi-use pathway along Wadham's to the building entry, paving patterns are designed to highlight street-to-building connection. Public benches, bike racks, waste receptacle, and plantings are selected to create an attractive pedestrian-oriented landscape. The site and building design also incorporates SEPTED principles, and that is crime prevention through environmental design. This is done through provision of advanced surveillance system, access control, appropriate lighting to ensure public safety and security. The lighting standards in the parking lot will provide security but are also dark sky, which means there will be no light pollution or nuisance to the adjacent properties. There will be wall-mounted luminaries around the building, like on the building, for additional site lighting. Garbage will be kept in an enclosure under the building on the southeast corner adjacent to the loading bay. So now for the fun part. The building itself is proposed as a one-story, single-use round building on a raised base or pedestal to take advantage of the grades of the site. This provides an opportunity to conceal the parking from Wadham's Way. Although the design of the building does not provide a proportional relationship to the street, the design attempts to do so by extending the roof line at the front entry to create a sense of enclosure for the pedestrian once on the site, thus providing a highly visible and prominent architectural feature. The entrance has a raised roof line that is squared in parallel to the sidewalk and road and is held up by large stained timber beams. In the top image on the screen, you'll also see the patterned pavement and bike parking described from the previous slide. The enlarged, clear, transparent windows at the entry also creates a welcoming feature that overlooks the street and sidewalk. Overall, the building meets the desired West Coast design character that's sought in the town center plan through the use of stone accent cladding, vertical cedar siding, and metal cladding. This adds texture and contrast to the exterior facade and is reminiscent of Sooke's significant marine and logging history. And I have a materials board that I'll pass around so that. In the lower image, metal banding that's hovering in front of the windows, these are exterior louvers that are intended to prevent solar heat gain during the hottest times of the year. Their location was determined using solar analysis. The angles of the blades will be positioned to allow natural light and beneficial heat gain during cooler months of the year. This system puts less stress on the mechanical cooling system and saves energy while increasing occupant comfort. It also adds aesthetic value to the building by breaking up the facade and providing additional depth to design. The building design also incorporates energy-efficient lighting, low-flow plumbing fixtures, low VOC interior finishes, and radiant floor heating and cooling, and will be retrofitted for solar panels should they wish to add them in the future. So I think as far as energy efficiencies and those guidelines sought in the OCP, this building is attempting to exceed some of those expectations, which will also adds to some of Council's strategic priorities for environmental sustainability and in public design. This slide shows the elevations from north, south, east, and west. It's just a helpful tool in illustrating the grade change and how the building design responds to that change. So the second from the top, that second image from the top is the east elevation. So that's the view if you were standing on the access or driveway road looking west towards Townsend. You can see how the site slopes downward from Wadham's and from where the main entrance would be to the access in the parking lot. This is the residential interface with those residential properties, their rear yards abutting the west property line. So it's the properties facing Townsend. So this would be if you are standing on the sidewalk or the multi-use pathway looking towards the back of the mall along the edge of those rear property lines. So from Wadham's Way into the site, there'd be a stepped retaining wall about 8 meters in length with guardrails along the top. As the retaining wall steps down into the site, it will transition into a 1.8 meter high cedar fence for the remaining western edge of the development area. This is another image looking west towards the rear yards of those residential properties. As you can see from this image, between the parking lot curb and the western property line will be a strip of landscaping that will contain shrubs, grasses, and trees in addition to the 1.8 meter cedar fence. So this table depicts the standard zoning bylaw regulations for the P2 Community Facilities Zone. The proposal meets all of the requirements. It is proposing to provide double the required parking stalls, but compensates by providing 4 level 2 EV charging stations. And I will leave that as this concludes my presentation. If council has any questions, I'll leave the table up for in case you have questions. And the applicant is here, as I mentioned earlier.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Campbell. Did the applicant wish to add anything to the presentation at this time? No? Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you very much for being here tonight. This is really exciting. So I'm very pleased to see this here, and I just want to acknowledge and thank everyone for all of their work that has gone into this file to sort of make this a reality for our community. I know that it's been something we've been waiting for quite some time, and I know that there's been That's, I guess at some time it seems like there was significant mountains to move, but you've moved them all, and that's really exciting. So thank you so much to everyone. I really like the circular design and just all the finishings, the attention to detail, the landscaping, and just how you're preparing the building. It's going to be here for some 50-plus years, so trying to find something that doesn't sort of suit the now, but can innovate and move in the future. So I find that as libraries themselves evolve and change, we've seen that in the design. Love the solar panel part and just how that may move over time, and just the amount of windows, and I think it's great. Full support. Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, what's the projected timeline for shovels in the ground? Who am I asking this to? I'm not sure.
Actually, so this, because we're tied into the webcast, it would just be more appropriate, and if you could just introduce yourself.
My name is Rod Winjack. I'm with HDR Architecture. To answer that question, it part depends on how quickly we can get the building permit turned around. Our client has had us proceed with the working drawings, so a lot of those technical drawings are ready to be submitted in very short order. So we're trying to get it in and approved and get shovels in the ground. We're looking at 16 month, about a 16-month construction period. So the sooner we get started, the better.
Okay, 16 months from when you shovel in the ground.
When we shovel to when the doors will open, yes.
Okay, exciting. As a follow-up to that, it would be nice to do like a sort of joint shovel digging ceremony. If we could arrange that together, I think that would be.
That's our practice.
Okay, that would be wonderful, and I think that would just sort of say, like, we're serious, you're there, we're there, all there together. I have a beautiful shovel, just waiting to get dirty, so.
I think we all want to celebrate the start.
Yeah, so I think that's really important, likely best once, I'll leave it to you to determine when that would be suitable, but we certainly want to support and would love that.
Great.
I'll bring the shovel, and the scissors to have at the end, let's get scissors for that too. Councillor Bateman?
Okay. Well, welcome to our visitors tonight. Just acknowledge that Rosemary Bonanno, the Executive Director of Viral, is here with us tonight. And Mr. Winjack, who I believe you were involved in the building of EMCS, Edward Milne Community School?
18 years ago now.
There we go.
Also Journey Middle School and École Poirier.
Okay.
So I've got the distinct, or have had the distinct privilege of doing some what I think are very important buildings in Sooke. So, yeah, over the years.
And your associate Juan Gulmatico, who is...
Juanito, yes.
Juanito. Okay. Thank you for...
And we also have Megan Walker, who is the landscape architect on the project as well.
Okay,
so.
Fantastic. So it's been really, I'm the Viral board representative, and it's been fascinating being part of this process in the small degree that I have been. I've likened it in recent weeks to a pregnancy. It's a period here. So the first trimester, as I've interpreted it, extended from 2008, when it was kind of the gleam in the eye, and that we had Ron Dumont, Councillor Dumont, was our representative in those days. And that first trimester extended until 2017, when we finally came to an agreement with Viral for the Northwest Quadrant. So in this unusual pregnancy, the second trimester began with the process of getting to get the lease agreed to and the development permit, which involved a lot of really healthy back and forth between our District of Sooke staff and Viral and the architect. And I think we've come up with, it is very exciting to see this. Third trimester, of course, is getting it built. So I guess it'll last for 16 months once we've agreed to this development permit. Yeah, so I think that's all I've got to say. Just it is exciting. It's a unique structure. We've waited a while for this, and given that our first library, 56 years ago, was in the current home of Barb's barber shop. It later moved to the site of Route 14, our restaurant, and it's been on Anne Marie since '95. So very exciting next step for us. So thank you all.
Just in terms of question, will the existing library then remain open until this one opens? Okay, so the service will remain there and then one will
Yes, it
close
will,
and this
yeah.
will open. Okay, that's great, thank you. Councillor St. Pierre?
Just quickly, I was very impressed with so many of the features that are making this building innovative and energy efficient. I was wondering if you knew where you were sitting in terms of the step code, just because you've got a lot of good things happening, and whether or not there was any idea on that.
That's part of our analysis. The building has gone through energy analysis, specifically to the step code. That will come as we finish off the working drawings. I can't really answer that right now. I'm not 100% sure what level we're at.
I'll be happy.
But it has been designed to be environmentally responsive.
Totally got that one.
Both for that and for operating costs as well.
Yeah, I was also impressed with the rainwater gardens and other features, especially the connectivity with pedestrian walkways, streetscape, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of good work into this design.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions from members of council? Okay, so we do have a recommendation before us tonight, and that is that council approve development permit PLN 01421 as attached for the subject property municipally addressed as 6671 Wadhams Way. Moved by Councillor McMath, seconded by Councillor Bateman. Questions on that first part? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, it's carried unanimously. The second part then is that prior to issuance, the applicant provide a landscape estimate for review and approval by the manager of planning and head of Parks and Environment, enter into a landscape agreement with the District of Sooke and provide a landscape bond of 110% of the cost estimate for soft and hard landscaping. So moved by Councillor St. Pierre, seconded by Councillor Lajeunesse. Questions on that matter? All right, all those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. So thank you very much. We're very excited, and I'm hoping that we can get that building permit out very soon, so we can see you again very soon, early in the new year, hopefully, if not sooner.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, and safe travels to all of you as you're driving back home again.
No police escort for you.
No, they've already left. I guess they weren't as concerned, but thank you. It's so exciting. Yay.
Quite impressive looking building.
Oh, it looks great.
Oh, does
Would you
anybody
like
want
your
this back?
materials board, or it's ours?
It's
Okay.
ours. Okay, sorry. Okay.
Perfect, thank you, but don't forget your purse, I see it under your chair. Okay, very good, thank you, that's exciting. Okay, 11.3, can this be moved together or separately?
I think it's ours? Oh, whatever.
Thank you, Your Worship. They can be moved together.
Okay, so the next part here is that council rescind the appointment of Mr. Rob Howitt as approving officer, and that council appoint Mr. Jeff Mitten as approving officer under section 77 of the Land Title Act. Moved by Councillor McMath and seconded by Councillor St. Pierre. Questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. 12.1 is on the firearms and bow use bylaw number 650. So this has been up before council for a while now. And just some questions then there that were brought forward was about, from the member of the public, about why this applies to ALR land only and about the 2 hectares or greater piece. Welcome, staff.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. We're recommending that Council rescind the third reading of the bylaw cited as Firearms and Bow Use Bylaw 650, and that Council give third reading to the bylaw cited as Firearms and Bow Use Bylaw number 650 as amended. His report provides a history on the district's firearm regulation bylaw and brings forward for consideration a revised version of the bylaw considered in 2017 that combine the regulation of both firearms and bows. January 25th, 2016, Council directed staff to provide a report regarding amendments to bylaw number 59 to exempt farmers with crop damage permits from the bylaw and to permit them to hunt during hunting season on lands for which crop damage permit has been issued. January 9, 2017, bylaw number 659 was presented to Council. However, Council directed staff to amend the bylaw to include hobby farmers that are permitted to protect crops and or livestock. September 5th, 2017, Council directed staff to bring back a streamlined version of the firearms bylaw and ensure it specifically addresses bow hunting and the culling of geese. The District of Sooke's firearm regulation bylaw number 59 does not regulate bow use. As demographics change and population increases and land use moves from large farming parcels to small lots, there's a need to update the firearms bylaw and include a prohibition on bow use. When the District of Sooke adopted the firearms regulation bylaw, population was approximately 8,735 for an area of 56.72 square kilometers. The current population is approximately 14,500. Some residents have expressed concern after witnessing deer wounded from bows. Staff has spoken with a conservation officer and both share the paramount concerns of public safety, that arrows are not hitting their intended target in a manner that will dispatch the animal properly, and that bows are used without safety in mind. The District of Sooke's firearm regulation bylaw 59 addressed firearm regulation only. While the average crossbow speed is 300 to 350 feet per second, some crossbows can project arrows with a speed of 350 to 440 feet per second and can be lethal. Regulation of crossbows is recommended and is included in the attached proposed bylaw that would replace bylaw number 59. The attached Capital Regional District's Regional Goose Management Strategy is a long-term planning document and does not have any practical use with the proposed firearms and bow regulation bylaw. So the question that was raised by Mrs. Lewers about the minimum 2 hectares in ALR. Research has shown that a lot of the municipalities are following that same guideline, that an errant bow or even a bullet cannot safely be managed on lots less than 2 hectares. We researched the issue of hobby farms and permits, and we couldn't find any specific regulation directed to hobby farms. It was included in farming and ALR property. Do you have any questions?
Nope. Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'm a little puzzled by, why does it have to be ALR land? If 2 hectares is 2 hectares, and you know, somebody has a hobby farm of 2 hectares and they have this problem, what would the designation of ALR have to do with it? Is it just more houses on the other property, or?
Generally, agricultural land reserve property has farms on it. So if you just limit it to 2 hectares, then, and not regulate that there's going to be crops or livestock raised on that property, yeah, then it could go errant.
The reason I ask that is Mrs. Lewis did state that there's a lot of hobby farms here that aren't an ALR land, and they still have problems with their crops. I understand that the ALR land is going to, well, hopefully have crops, But there's still these other, and if we're having a bylaw that affects two properties, I'm more, I don't mind 2 hectares. But if someone has 2 hectares or more and they have to prove that their crops are being damaged, I assume, before they can legally dispatch any animal, I just don't see why it has to be ALR land and not just farmland, period.
Councillor St. Pierre?
I have the same sort of thoughts, but I have a few more. Just one of them is, were there any hobby farmers actually involved in actually crafting the bylaw? Because I found out pretty quickly as a newbie farmer that a rifle was actually a tool for farming, that you needed it for slaughtering a pig, for actually doing work on the farm, for shooting stuff that was eating for shooting threatening animals. There's all kinds of reasons why it's a tool. The 2 hectare, based on the size of it, you could actually be in a situation where if you're not using your firearm properly and safely, you could still be putting people at risk despite everything that's in the bylaw. So I don't actually see that as useful. You have to make sure people are using the tool properly. The 2 hectares and 150 meters from a building, which is ridiculous, by the way, you end up not being able to protect anything because most of your gardens and most of your crops are actually close to your buildings. I can speak to that. So most of this actually doesn't seem to, if it's meant to actually assist hobby farmers in some way, I would think that it's kind of missing the mark. This is not quite doing it. Also, the population size would be largely irrelevant unless there's actually a safety concern. I mean, how many people have actually been harmed with bows or with being shot at with the rising population? Do we have any statistics on that? Because I don't know that there's necessarily a lot of, I don't understand the intent, I guess, of a lot of this. And most of it doesn't seem to actually work to do what it's supposed to. So I've got, I don't know, that's kind of where I'm at.
So the bylaw's been around for quite some time, since 2001. So then it was sort of brought forward for a bit of a refresh in 2016, and then there were some concerns raised, which is where it's sort of stalled out, and then it's sort of where we're at today. Is that about correct in terms of history? Because I'm just looking at the dates of adoption and amendments made, so it has been in place longer when there was less density than there is now. Anyway, Councillor St. Pierre?
I would just add very quickly that I do see that a crossbow is just as nasty as a rifle for that. I mean, if anything, it's actually more dangerous. So I totally can see actually putting restrictions on crossbows similar to those on firearms. But for the rest of it, it seems it needs to be looked at in terms of how are you actually going to farm within these restrictions, and given that most of our farmers are not on ALR, this doesn't help them. So there's just a whole lot of stuff that just doesn't seem to work.
Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, I understand the process, right? We have this firearms regulation. Now we're just introducing crossbows to the mix. I think that's the reason why we're updating it. I guess sometime in the future we can look at the whole bylaw now that we have crossbows. I disagree. A firearm is a great deal more dangerous than a crossbow. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing crossbows on 1 hectare. We have a problem in Sooke with deer running all over the place. I don't want to get into a great discussion about that, but that might help the situation. But for what you're proposing, I don't have a great deal of problem with it. Bring crossbows into the mix. I'd rather have somebody hunting on my property with a crossbow than with a .308 rifle, which can go for miles and miles. And a crossbow, it dissipates pretty quick.
Councillor McMath?
I shoot a crossbow on my property. Here we go. Martin. Yeah, I think it's interesting that we're looking at deer birth control, which is incredibly expensive, and then we're looking at removing bow use from properties. And again, I don't really want to get into it. It's like a hot topic. That's maybe not for tonight. I don't want to add the crossbow to this bylaw. How many people have been injured from a crossbow, misfired, in like the last decade here? Do you know?
Your worship, in conversations with the conservation officers and, you know, particularly in the Whiffen-Spit area, there was, you know, a lot of people hunting deer with crossbows at night across the road, you know, and totally unsafe. Have people been directly injured by an arrow? Not that I've heard of.
Sorry, may I?
Probably not that they would admit to, but
But-
there
well,
was the
but-
case
but-
where there was animals suffering because they were being shot and then.
But that
and
was a
then-
one-off anomaly that I feel like got a lot of hype too. And
There
so
was
my,
quite a flurry of emails about it for a while, a few years ago.
what you're describing, that's illegal, period,
Yes,
regardless of this
absolutely.
bylaw.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure why it's here. Is it here because people saw an injured deer, which really tugged at their heartstrings and they wanted to make sure that didn't happen? Or are we here for like a safety reason, which I'm not really sure why we're here.
Is this here now because it's just been sitting sort of as a incomplete file for some time?
It was, and it came to staff's attention that it was outstanding, I believe, because Councillor Bateman was at a recent CRD meeting and Director Hicks had raised the question where the bylaw was sitting, which then staff turned their mind back to the bylaw and is bringing it forward for council's consideration.
Yeah, so it's here because there's been just some internal housekeeping needed
Okay.
on some outstanding things. I don't think it's because there's been any new
push.
developments, it's just the case it's been sitting for a while. Councillor Beddoes?
In bygone years, when I used to hunt, I saw a great deal of animals that are being wounded by a bullet, as much as an arrow that suffered and went on for years, sometimes with a broken leg and that from a bullet. I think it's a step in the right direction. I have to agree with Councillor St. Pierre. I don't think it goes far enough, but right now we're just mixing a bow into a standing policy we've had on firearms, and I don't have a problem with it.
Councillor McMath?
So if someone calls in to complain about their neighbor shooting a crossbow, now the RCMP have to attend the scene if we amend this bylaw?
It's advisable, you know, certainly bylaw staff would attend with the RCMP or with conservation officers. The very nature of having that weapon, you know, certainly puts staff at risk. So, you know, we wouldn't attend to a call for a firearm discharge or unsafe use of a bow by ourselves. You know, certainly if the conservation officers go, for example, you know, there's other regulations, provincial, the Wildlife Act and Migratory Bird Act that they can enforce as well.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, so if we amend this bylaw, they now have to go to the call, correct?
They don't have to go to the call. It's always been an unwritten policy that bylaw officers would not attend a call if there was a firearm involved.
Or a weapon, so if you
Well-
received a call from somebody firing off a slingshot to the point where neighbors were complaining, you would probably attend that call with.
Absolutely.
With police anyway, because there is a risk of harm there.
Yeah, it depends on the circumstances and what the nature of the complaint is. You know, certainly we wouldn't want to attend if the guy's got the firearm in his hands. You know, so every situation would be taken accordingly. We quite often accompany the RCMP and vice versa on calls in Sooke.
It sounds to me like this isn't an issue, and that the stuff that you described that's happening at Whiffen-Spit that was just purely illegal, and that's an anomaly. But there isn't a rampant compound bow problem here, so I'm not keen to amend the bylaw.
Well, Your Worship, part of, you know, the bow regulation is they're more stealth, they're quiet. You know, you can imagine somebody firing off a rifle is going to draw more attention than somebody shooting a bow. And so this bylaw would help in that situation, just that, you know, it's not allowed. You know, I mean, deer have been struck with an arrow, and they've been out walking around in Casinos, Whiff and Spit, West Coast Road, you know, in a lot of areas, so it's not just an anomaly.
How many deer, like, I'm just sorry, I'm so annoying. How many deer have been wounded by a compound bow and have been walking around, like, in the last, like, 2 years?
I don't have the number. Right where I live, there was a deer that had an arrow sticking out of its head.
I just feel like a little bit like this is just a small thing that we're, sorry, I'm not very articulate right now.
This was sparked about, it was a goose conversation, if I'm not mistaken, that sparked this conversation a few years back in terms of goose control. It's not about deer control. It was never about deer. It was more about goose, my recollection. And that's why that goose strategy, the goose piece is in here. Councillor St. Pierre?
I guess I'm wondering about if, it's almost this whole thing, I think Councillor Beddoes was talking about firearms and how it's really easy to restrict use of firearms to people who are actually already obeying the law, and they'll probably stop using the bows, but they probably don't have one to begin with. But then the people that are actually doing the damage and shooting an animal and letting it suffer, those people, I don't know if this will affect them at all. So I'm not really sure, again, if we're not increasing restrictions on the people that would probably follow the rules and not break them to begin with and not do cruel things to animals, and meanwhile the people who are they're just going to keep doing it. I don't know. I have a suspicion that it's simply, again, not going to quite hit the mark.
It was about goose management, really, and so that people could look at goose management. Councillor Beddoes?
If you have to dispatch any of these animals, they have to be done according to the hunting season and all those regulations. So it's not as though you're going to have a bunch of 14-year-old boys out there with their bow sets shooting these things. They have to, have a hunting license, I believe, if they're going to hunt on any property. And all we're doing is not only approving, well, we've already got the firearms portion of it, we're just approving them. They can use a lethal bow, crossbow. And, well, I'm not so sure they can already. I mean, this is why we're changing this. This is why we're changing this law. All we're doing is keeping the existing law or bylaw, and we're just adding to the fact that instead of a shotgun, I'm not sure to use a shotgun than a rifle because of the distance, just adding crossbows. And I don't have a big problem with it. It sounds like the way to go. I do have some problems with, I don't think it, goes far enough, but that's not why we're here tonight. We're just here to add the crossbow to the mix in the firearms category, and I'm okay with it.
Okay, Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, so I did a little homework on the aftermath of the first attempt to put the bylaw through, and the pushback seemed to be coming from hobby farmers who needed to use crossbows to shoot raccoons and martins who were breaking into their taking away their chickens and ducks and geese, domestic geese, not, well, Canada geese. And one of the suggestions from people out there was an exemption for hobby farmers. So we've done that. However, it seems it's 4.94 acres. So there's a lot of hobby farmers with smaller properties. So I can see the logic of putting the crossbow into this bylaw because there is irresponsible use of crossbows by non-hobby farmers. So if the bylaw had an exemption for people who genuinely are out there raising livestock and need this technology to control pests, that would make sense. As for the Canada geese, that's come up at the CRD recently, and there are something in the order of 6,000 non-migratory Canada geese in the CRD. They were brought in like 1960. There were none prior to 1960, and someone thought they'd be a wonderful thing to hunt. So they've grown unchecked until about 2012, or 2015, they began egg addling programs, and they've managed to keep the population at about 6,000. Without these programs, the projection is they might get up to 60,000 by 2035. And then Mr. Hicks, just to quote Director Hicks from that meeting, he stated that he noted that in 2015 there was a project to eliminate Canada geese in Saanich, and they had CRD had a permit to cull up to 250 geese. They only managed to capture or kill 43 of them, and so it cost about $725 each to kill these 43 Canada geese. So it's not apropos to much at all regarding this bylaw, but I think adding a crossbow isn't a terribly bad thing, given that there are irresponsible use of crossbows, but there's also responsible use in hobby farms that are less than 2 hectares.
Okay, so we have the report, and we've had a discussion on this. Final thought?
Final question, actually. To your worship, to anyone who could answer. At this point in time, is it possible for someone that has a less than 2 hectare property to use a crossbow or bow to manage their pest control? Is it legal at this point in time for people to do that?
I would say
No,
no.
I need a.
Do we know?
I think it's no, because
It's still a no?
crossbows.
I don't know. It would fall under Migratory Bird Act and hunting regulations, so I don't know.
Well, I don't know about the migratory birds, but I'm thinking more in terms of martins and raccoons and such.
Oh, okay.
Which are honestly a bigger problem for taking away chickens. So what I'm assuming, based on a previous reading, because I actually looked at this a couple of years ago, is that it is legal. And it's legal for those small hobby farmers who are not in ALR land to actually manage their pest control using a crossbow and a bow.
Okay.
Be the
If
right
that-
to farm act. Be the right to farm
With the Right to
act.
Farm Act, which means that if we actually pass this, we're removing from these people tools that they actually need to manage pest control. And so once again, I don't think I can support this.
Do we want to come back to that? We can get clarity on those questions. This is the first time this council has seen this, so.
Through your worship, we actually do have a legal opinion that was gathered during the preparation of the initial amendment. So we could certainly circulate that to council for additional information, and we could postpone consideration of this to a future meeting.
Okay, why don't we do that? So we've had some, and then if you have other questions, then we can look at getting those answers, just so that we're sure at the next meeting. So do you need a resolution that council postpone discussion of the firearms and bow use bylaw to the next regular council meeting? Okay, so look for that by Councillor McNaughton, seconded by Councillor Beddoes. Okay, and if you have any other questions, just send them over to our staff and bylaw officer. Okay, all right. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. I was going to say I'll call the question, but that's not right. So postpone. Okay, item 12.2. Oh, we'll just wait till we switch screens here. Thank you very much, Chief Mount, and to Ms. Mills. So we do have a report here. This is on our next one is the zoning amendment bylaw number 747, 600-75, 2019, 2020 Kaltassin Road. And we have a report and a recommendation. Over to staff.
Thank you, Your Worship. Typically, we would not have a staff report for a bylaw that's coming forward for adoption. But with this particular application, there were 2 conditions on the rezoning application. The applicant was able to meet the second of the 2 conditions, but the dedication of 4-meter right-of-way has not been met. But we are asking for some accommodation because of some of the challenges that the application has had. If the rezoning is approved tonight, there will be the applicant will be required to apply for a building permit and a business license. And at the building permit stage, the requirement for the dedication will come at that time.
Okay, and in that case, it doesn't come back to council, staff would just be able to resolve that, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, because it's building permit. Okay, questions, Councillor St. Pierre? Okay, do these be moved separately or together? Separately?
These ones we should move separately, please.
Okay, so the first one by Councillor St. Pierre is that council receive the staff report for information, seconded by Councillor Logans. Any further questions? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. And the second one is that the bylaw cited as zoning amendment bylaw number 747, 600-75, 2019 be adopted.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Bateman and seconded by Councillor Lajeunesse. Questions? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. Great, okay. Hope that works itself out. Soon. Okay, 12.3, fees and charges bylaw number 752. Come on, it's exciting. It's fees and charges. You're most welcome. That's great, thank you. Good night. Fees and charges just clears the room.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as has been alluded to over the past few months, that we were working on a new fees and charges bylaw. So we have worked with all departments and reviewed all of our fees and charges. As in part of doing that, we have taken all of the fees and charges out of the respective bylaws and consolidated them into one fees and charges bylaw. And that will have two perks. One, that people can only have to go to one location to find out what their fees are going to be. And second, when it comes time for our annual review, we only have to amend one bylaw and we can simply swap out the appropriate schedules. Thank you. Attached to the report is a list of all of the schedules with the existing fee, the proposed fee, the last year that the fee was either introduced or increased, as the case may be. And as well, there's a column that contains the rationale for the increase in the fee. For the most part, all the way throughout, comparisons were done, as well as an evaluation of the actual cost of providing that service. So the fees have been proposed at a cost recovery basis, and as well as being in line with other surrounding municipalities, so just as a comparator. So if you have any specific questions, staff would be happy to answer them.
Councillor Beddoes?
Just thank you for coming forward with that. That was one of the things when we first elected that we wanted to see changed. I know it's taken a year, but in municipal time, that's light years. It's come very well. I didn't look at all the fees and charges, but they were long overdue. And the process that you've introduced here and how to amend them and everything is just absolutely excellent. I commend you on your work. Very nicely done.
Okay, I know it does that. I thought it was interesting to see things like floppy disks and computer tapes and cassette tapes, and do we still have technology that plays these things?
We could potentially. Those particular fees are straight out of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act,
Okay.
and we have no control over those ones. So, and it could exist as a record somewhere, so we still have to have the ability to charge for it.
But do we have to maintain the technology to actually play these files?
I would guess that we probably, I would say that there's probably some that we don't have the technology, but I know that neighboring municipalities have it where we could borrow it if necessary.
Like a tape player? Okay. Just, all right. Questions, other questions? No, this is great. This is a lot of work, but I think it just, you know, it's all in one place, and then there's no other lists, and then over time is, you could just amend this to, with CPI or whatever, and then it's just one thing that increases, because in some cases, like, there's been no increase since incorporation, or even probably before that, it would be a carryover from regional district times. Councillor McMath.
Yeah, so overdue, so beautiful. Thank you so much. And I just have one little question, if you know through your worship, based off like last year's fees, what is the financial difference for the year potentially?
That is going to vary. I would say that it's the building fees and our planning fees that are going to have the most impact moving forward. And I will turn it over to Ms. Campbell to speak to the planning fees.
So I did, through your worship, a comparison. If we received the same number and the same type of development applications, zoning development, from January to November, because that's how we calculated what we've done so far in this past year, we'd get an additional $45,000. There would probably be more than that, because we anticipate there'd be more applications with
Right.
growth and stuff. But that's very, like, that's the base fees. That doesn't include the, 50 cents per square meter we add as well for applications. That's just the base fee uptake.
It kills me a little bit that it took this long because like that's lost money, but I'm so happy. So thank you.
Yeah, the development application fees haven't increased since 2011, so it's quite a long time to catch up.
Ms. Gray, did you have something more to add?
Well, I can just speak to the building fees a little, and I'm still kind of working on the analysis of that right now, but probably similar in the lines with the development and planning fees is like, because they're very complicated. There's a base fee, but then there's also the per square meter fee. So it'll be totally dependent on the type of permits we receive, the value of the construction. So it's going to be hard to estimate, but I definitely will be conservative in the revenue that'll be included in the budget being presented on December 5th. Presumably this passes and goes through, then I will, and I can give some more details on that on December 5th.
Okay, so Councillor McMath? Okay, so we have that council give first, second, and third reading to the bylaw cited as fee and charges bylaw number 752, 2019, moved by Councillor McMath, seconded by Councillor Beddoes. Anything further from anyone? See none, all those in favor? Opposed, is carried unanimously.
Yeah, I'm pretty damn happy about that.
Okay, that's great.
That's good. You see something come through.
So now, for this part, we go through them one at a time, right?
I'm sorry, Your Worship, as painful as this may be, for 16 bylaws,
Okay,
it will have massive improvement over future bylaws.
okay, very good. So,
Yeah, yeah.
pardon?
make us read our motions so you don't have to get
Okay, so we'll start with Councillor Logan's number 1.
That council give first, second, and third reading to the bylaw cited as Animal Regulation and Impounding Amendment Bylaw Number 754, 3092-3, 2019.
Moved by Councillor Logan, seconded by Councillor St. Pierre. Questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Is carried unanimously. Councillor Lajeunesse. Microphone.
That council give first, second, and third reading to a bylaw cited as the Blasting Regulation Amendment Bylaw Number 755, 72-2, 2019.
Moved by Councillor Lajeunesse, seconded by Councillor McMath. Questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Is carried unanimously. Number 3, Councillor Bateman.
Okay, that council give first, second, and third reading to the bylaw cited as Building Regulation Amendment Bylaw Number 756, 70-08, 2019.
Moved by Councillor Bateman, seconded by Councillor Beddoes. Any questions? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. Number 4, Councillor Beddoes.
I thought you were going, so I was going to the next one already. That council give first, second, and third reading to the bylaw cited as Business License Regulation Amendment Bylaw Number 757-301-3, 2019.
Moved by Councillor Beddoes, seconded by Councillor Bateman. Any questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Is carried unanimously. Number 5, Councillor McMath.
That council give first, second, and third reading to the bylaw cited as Community Parks Regulation Amendment Bylaw Number 758-101-4, 2019.
Moved by Councillor McMath, seconded by Councillor Lajeunesse. Any questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Is carried unanimously. Number 6, Councillor St. Pierre.
The council give first, second, and third reading to the bylaw cited as Development Procedures Amendment Bylaw Number 759-490-1, 2019.
Moved by Councillor St. Pierre, seconded by Councillor Loggins. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Is carried unanimously. Number 7, Councillor Loggins.
That council give first, second, and third reading to the bylaw cited as False Alarm Amendment Bylaw, my favorite title for a bylaw, number 760-66-1, 2019.
It's moved by Councillor Loggins and seconded by Councillor St. Pierre. All those in favor? Opposed? Is carried unanimously. Number 8, Councillor Lajeunesse.
The council give first, second, and third reading to the bylaw cited as Fire Protection Services Amendment Bylaw Number 761-392-7, 2019.
It was 292.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Friendly amendment moved by Councillor Lajeunesse, seconded by Councillor McMath. Questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Is carried unanimously. Councillor Bateman, number 9.
Okay, that council give first, second, and third reading to the bylaw cited as Fireworks Regulation Amendment Bylaw Number 762-286-1, 2019.
Moved by Councillor Bateman, seconded by Councillor Beddoes. Questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Is carried unanimously. Number 10, Councillor Beddoes.
And that council give first, second, and third reading to the bylaw cited as Flood Regulation Amendment Bylaw Number 763-561-1, 2019.
Moved by Councillor Beddoes, seconded by Councillor Bateman. Any questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Is carried unanimously. Number 11, Councillor McMath.
It's a great number. It's my birthday. That council give first, second, and third reading to the bylaw cited as nuisance control. I read that right? Yeah. Controlled Substance Property Amendment Bylaw Number 768-268. Oh my gosh, 764-268-1, 2019.
Moved by Councillor McMath, seconded by Councillor Lajeunesse. Any questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Is carried unanimously. Number 12, Councillor St. Pierre.
The council give first, second, and third reading to the bylaw cited as Sign Regulation Amendment Bylaw Number 765-480-1, 2019.
Moved by Councillor St. Pierre, seconded by Councillor Lokins. All those in favor? Opposed? Is carried unanimously. Number 13, Councillor Lokins.
That council give first, second, and third reading to the bylaw cited as Deposit of Soil Prohibition Amendment Bylaw Number 766-1473-2, 2019.
Moved by Councillor Logan, seconded by Councillor Lajeunesse. All those in favor? Opposed? Is carried unanimously. Number 14, Councillor Lajeunesse.
The council give first, second, and third reading to the bylaw cited as Soil Removal Prohibition Amendment Bylaw Number 767-1472-2, 2019.
Moved by Councillor Lajeunesse, seconded by Councillor Logans. All those in favor? Opposed? Is carried unanimously. Councillor Bateman.
That council give first, second, and third reading to the bylaw cited as Subdivision and Development Standards Amendment Bylaw Number 768-404-1, 2019.
Moved by Councillor Bateman, seconded by Councillor Loggins. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. And I'll do number 16. That council give first, second, and third reading to the bylaw cited as Traffic and Highways Regulation Amendment Bylaw Number 769-67-3, 2019. Moved by Councillor Beddoes, seconded by Councillor Lajeunesse. Questions? All those in favor? Opposed?
You can't say we're not doing business, sorry.
Wow, look at that. Good spread, good idea. Okay. New business, there is none, so council verbal reports. Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, well, my mic's still on, that's even better. Just let you know, at Thursday's meeting for Sea Park, you're going and you're going to come too. The minutes aren't, agenda's not out yet, but we're going to do a little walkthrough in the new building. It's big vacant, but it's really quite impressive when you're in there. So we were going to have the meeting at the CRD hall. We're not. We're going to come back down to the arena, and Steve has organized a little walkthrough for the contractor to have him booth. And any other council that wants to come down. What's that meeting? 2, I think? 2, yeah. They're more than welcome to come down, and anybody else that wants to have a look at it. It's quite an impressive site. Cost a bundle, but it's pretty neat.
It's Thursday at 2:00.
Yeah.
And Councillor Bateman will attend
In your place.
in my behalf, and Councillor Lajeunesse will be
And
joining the
you're
commission.
my alternate, so I want you to come as well, please.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Other updates, Councillor Loggins.
There is a lot happening this week. Affordable Housing Committee is at 1:00 on Thursday. But I don't know if there's any councillors left over to attend alongside me. That's okay. We'll hold down the fort. I did attend the Good Food Summit for a day and a half alongside Councillor Lajeunesse and Councillor St. Pierre. That was it, right? Yeah. Don't want to miss anyone. And it was really great because one of our own, our Sooke farming legend, Mary Alice Johnson, received the Lifetime Achievement Award. And that was really wonderful. It was on the very first afternoon in front of the whole summit. So congratulations to her. We also had 2 Edward Milne grads, recent grads in the past 5 years, at one of the booths promoting some indigenous food initiatives, which was really nice to see. I would say Sooke was really well represented, not only in terms of our number of councillors attending, but also community members. So that was really nice to have. One more thing. One of the more interesting workshops that I attended was one on the challenges of young farmers and harvesters, and there was a great panel discussion with some young farmers and harvesters on land and on sea. And they were discussing that the challenges they have are access to capital, recognizing aquaculture as farming, farmer isolation, which I thought was interesting because I usually see it as such a strong community, but forget that you're often working in smaller groups or alone, or you're working so hard you're not really getting out and about. So that was interesting as well. Another challenge was farming and business mentorship, and the fact that they feel farming might be overlooked a little bit in the small business initiatives that are out there. So anywhere where there's like Small Business BC helping out with getting your business started, it doesn't really speak specifically to the needs of young farmers. So that was interesting as well. They have challenges developing a skilled workforce, which I think is something we'll see across many industries coming soon. And paying the skilled workforce, of course, on farming wages, paying mortgages on farming wages and income, access to land, access to fishing licenses, that was another really big concern. Food distribution, and that was an interesting one because they're kind of calling out to local municipalities to see how we can help with issues such as food distribution. I'm not really sure, but perhaps other councillors have ideas on that. And the negativity associated with farming. They do feel a lot of negativity, which is quite interesting. I think in general we see farmers as like wonderful people in our society, but there's also a lot happening that doesn't support them, and they definitely feel it. So those were some of the big challenges that they faced. It was also interesting that our Minister of Agriculture, Ms. Popham, and MLA Mitzi Dean were there as well. However, they didn't stick around to hear the challenges, so we might have to push those a little bit harder next time we see them. Overall, it was a really, really great conference, not only for the content, but mostly for the networking, and the people we met there were really incredible, and the resources I think we came home with were really exceptional. So
They're very passionate
yeah.
about what they're doing.
very passionate group.
That's great. Thank you, Councillor Loggins. Other updates? Councillor St. Pierre?
Sorry, I guess I'll follow a little bit with the Food Summit, although I think Councillor Loggins has covered things beautifully, actually, really, really well. So there's not much left. There's not much left at all. But having said that, one thing that was an excellent takeaway was the speaker from Kwantlen College, Kent Mullenix, who, as it happens, was an excellent networking contact and fits into something else that I'm going to report on, which is the first meeting of the Climate Caucus Working Group on Food Security, which I headed up in this last week. And as it happens, Mr. Mullenix is actually doing policy work at Kwantlen College and may potentially have some best practices in terms, for example, of things like bylaws that we can look at in terms of food sustainability with, the resources of KPU behind, doing work on curating that stuff and helping us bring it forward. So I'm extremely excited at having met him and exchanging information. As Councillor Loggins said, I think the networking was just fabulous. This is only one of the people that we had a chance to talk to. It was a tremendously valuable experience. And of course, there is further work happening with the Climate Caucus on food security, and I again invite any council that wishes to do so. I can keep on sending out invites if you wish. And there's quite a lot of working groups and things happening at that level.
Anything else from anyone? Councillor Bateman?
Okay. So I was at the Viral board meeting on Saturday, and I didn't mention this while our guests were here, but Viral has got 39 branches, and there's something happening in at least a third of them. There'll be a new library in Chemainus. There's a new upgrades just completed in Sydney. A number of small modular libraries are being opened around the island. So we're not alone in getting their attention, and it's however we are this iconic new addition to their system, which they're excited about, as are we. So I also went to the Victoria Family Court and Youth Justice Committee last week, and the guest speaker was Dr. Jennifer Charlesworth. She's BC's official representative for children and youth. And she spoke to us on the 60th anniversary of the UN's Declaration of the Rights of the Child. And her department, which is appointed by the she's appointed by the Premier, deals with trauma, developmental brain issues, awareness of the impacts of residential schools, and I didn't know about residential hospitals, but there were those as well. So a whole nother realm that I didn't know about. They do advocacy, she does advocacy for non-binary, gender diverse kids. Such a different world today than when I was growing up. Critical injuries, fetal alcohol syndrome. It was quite a conversation. It was quite dark at times, but again, there's a lot of awareness and momentum moving towards ensuring that young people are A, given a voice, and B, captured in a social safety net of some kind. And upcoming on Wednesday, I'm be speaking at the Parks and Environment Committee of the CRDs. We've again got our request for some sort of off-leash exemption on CRD parks and trails in the district of Sooke, and we're hoping they'll throw us a bone by giving us some kind of off-leash exemption. A great, yeah. So there's a number, they've gone through the phase of issuing warnings, and now tickets are being issued. And what I'm going to suggest on Wednesday is that if a bylaw officer does see someone with a dog off leash, can that bylaw officer not ask the owner to say, can you bring your animal to command? And if they can't, then they get their ticket. But if they can, then yeah, they're I don't know, is that a good strategy? Potentially.
It potentially is. It's just right now the problem is that there's only our residents and the bylaw officer at the potholes and nobody else. So you're walking your dog or letting it run, and dogs need to run, and then you see somebody coming, and then it's the bylaw officer approaching, because there's nobody else out there in the early morning this time of year. There just isn't. So, yeah.
I run up there 3 times a week, and I run up to the second bridge, and I meet dogs and people, and I don't have any trouble at all. People are very nice. They hold their dogs when I go by. It takes me a while to go by them too. But I just wish the hell they would stay away and leave our people alone. I mean, I don't see anything up there.
Well, and the challenge with the goose is that yes, it's a regional trail, but it's not the same in different parts where it goes. So when you enter into downtown Victoria, it is a commuter trail. It's paved, people are commuting, there's a lot of people on it. Out here, the goose goes through our most sparsely populated area. It doesn't come into dense areas at all. And so it just seems ridiculous that if you live there, that you then have to drive to a park or one of our parks where you can have your dog under effective control. Like, doesn't make any sense to me. And when we would tell our residents to do that. If the goose is in their backyard, they should be able to go on the goose in their backyard and run or walk their dog. And that's part of it. It's a rural trail. It's not even paved. It's not effective for commuters because of where it lies. It doesn't fit. And then in terms of, we heard that, the dogs will bring the bears in. Well, the bears are all over Sooke, in every area right now. So there was one in our driveway at 7. At 7 o'clock, it walked down the street. So they're here all the time, like all the time in all areas, in the park, at Poyer, everything. Like, they're everywhere. So it's not a fair argument at all, and it doesn't make any sense to me at all. And really, this sounds terrible. If I'm out walking my son and there's a dog, I would prefer that the bear have a standoff with our dog, and I will let her off leash so I can safely get my son out of the area. Like, that's why I have a dog. It's for protection. I don't know. Anyway, continue, please.
Well, the good thing is that the CRD is bringing forward a dog management policy for all of its parks and trails, and there is a new assessment tool. So I think that we could be the first test of their assessment tool in seeking an off-season, off-leash exemption for a short stretch of the goose, 49 to 55. Yeah.
Okay, anything else to report
No,
out?
that's it.
Thank you, Councillor Bateman. So just a couple of things. For the Santa Parade is on Sunday. This is important news. We gather in Sooke Elementary at 4:30. Is that correct?
I think that's what we normally do it last year.
Okay, so is everyone available to walk in the parade? Oh, you're in Disneyland.
Did I rub that in again?
Yeah, okay.
Did I tell you what it's costing you?
Yeah. You're able to attend?
Yeah, if it's pissing down raining, if it's raining.
It never rains on the Santa Parade. But if it does, I'll just text me. You're not sure? Okay. Councillor Bateman will be there, Councillor St. Pierre, Councillor Sunday. Yes, the first. Sooke Elementary, and it's important to note that the parade does go up Townsend so that Otter Point isn't shut, correct? Because I know some people are still saying that they're going to be lining up their favorite spot on Otter Point. Like, how disappointing, like, just see the turn.
They can line up on Townsend.
I know, right? And I'm like, no, it goes on Townsend. No, it doesn't. I'm like, no, it's changed.
The lady that has the candy shop, and she wrote a letter to ask if we could run the parade farther down, past Otter Point, and go up Shields, so she can get all the business going by her place.
Right. But then once,
Closing the road is horrendous.
yeah. So then though, like, as far as where do we end, it's sort of, we hit Wadhams and then we can then it just disperses,
It'll
right?
disperse before it gets to Wadhams.
Okay, so it's just now, did anyone want to carry the banner, or we can just walk? The banner gets to be unruly. Well, unless you really want to carry it. Do you want to carry it?
Yeah.
Okay, so if we could have the banner, we should take that home. Who would like to take care of it?
I'll take it.
So Councillor Bateman.
It's not there. I'll take it.
Council, this is important planning. So Councillor Bateman will take care of the banner details. We'll all work together, just warmly have a Santa hat on. Okay, and then we'll sort of walk together. Do we know if the Premier's coming at this point? Okay, if we can, because he did, but he does slow the parade down because he talks. It's just long gap, but that's okay. And then our staff will do the light up when we get to the roundabout, so we can just do a little. Is that happening?
I'm sorry, Worship, I don't have any details, but I will have our head of parks confirm with council by email tomorrow morning the details.
Okay, these are just, okay, it's on my mind, just want to make sure that's all good. The other part that we had talked about early in the year was that at our first meeting in December, which would be whatever that December date is, that we had talked, it'll be our 20th year and we should have a cake and some sort of event. I've kind of forgotten about that, and given that there's so many people here, like, it just doesn't seem like a good idea anymore. And I think we just leave it. However, has there been an appetite? Like, should we hand out cupcakes outside the grocery store, like 20th anniversary, hey, district? No? Okay, I'm not seeing anything there, so I'm just checking in on these pieces in case you wonder. Okay. Okay, so we'll just leave it. Well, that's a wrap on the 20th anniversary.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, yes, that's the wrap on the 20th anniversary, we're good? That's a wrap, okay. In terms of the mayor's New Year's Day levee, that used to be an event that Councillor Brenda Parkinson had organized for myself and other mayors. And I reflected on that for quite some time and have decided to pass on doing it this year. And it's my mother's birthday, and so just given the state of her health, I don't know where family is going to be coming or going from. I just want to spend it with my mom and just not have a public event to deal with this year. And then I think in the new year, let's give some thought into what sort of events may make the most sense. So I think we'll issue out a media release just to say that there will not be a levee, that council is spending the time with, upon doing reflection with family, whatever. With family, it's just kind of important. Councillor St. Pierre?
I will say it's a wonderful event.
Yes, it is.
It is a very wonderful event.
It was. So but this year we'll just sort of take a pause there. So a few developments. You may know that I had entered a notice of motion for a mountain bike policy that Councillor Bateman brought to the Parks and Environment Committee. It passed, it went to the CRD board and also passed there unanimously. So also an allocation for an advisory group to be formed. If you were listening to CFAX last week, I was on the air for about half an hour just talking about that. And also the transit challenge, they were just asking why I chose not to support it, and just sort of a bit of the fun that Councillor Logans and I were having. I shared just our ability to hold quorum if you were all to take transit home. It just wouldn't work. We would be walking. It just does us no service, and that's why we're supporting transit improvements. Some other things here in terms of this week. Tomorrow I'm off to Ottawa, so I'll be there until Saturday. I come back Saturday around lunchtime. Are any of you attending the CRD Forum of Councils on Saturday? Okay. Okay. So that's at the Hotel Grand Pacific Saturday morning. There's about 80. Okay, Mr. McInnes. There's about 80 or so elected officials, along with representation from most of the First Nations also attending. It's the first of its kind to have that inclusive element. So I'm sorry to have missed it, but it's just the way the timing goes. I'm in Ottawa because of the FCM's board meetings and advocacy days, although we are not doing advocacy days because Parliament is just in the process of forming. So a lot of it will be the sort of post-election discussion and what the FCM positioning will be from the sort of advocacy leading up to and before and after. So that'll be interesting. Last week, I was at UBCM executive meetings. The focus there was to orientation for the new board, new executive members, and also looking at what our work plan and priorities will be for the next while. The resolution process is concluded. The unfinished resolutions will all be sent to various committees for their review and feedback. And then, but the cycle is concluded, and it's something that we may look at doing. I mentioned before about Local Government Leadership Academy. I did appoint myself successfully to that board. Also, some work that'll be coming out is sort of a relaunch of Strong Fiscal Futures. This was a very important UBCM-led initiative about how local government and the finance system. So an example will be things like strength in BC, per capita costs among the lowest in the country, we're relatively stable. Residential property taxes are amongst the lowest. Business taxes have been reduced, but the challenge in local government is that we are heavily reliant on property taxes, which doesn't grow with the economy, and nor does it distribute costs fairly. Infrastructure upgrades required will cost billions over the years, and it'll force property taxes up. And also levels of provincial support do not provide a mechanism with which to counteract the sluggishness of property tax with respond to economic growth. And so there was a positioning document that was put forward to the Assembly, very solid document, but it didn't get any traction with the then government in 2013. So there's been a call by the membership to rebrand and to re-update all of this work. So this work will be kicking off in December on a special committee.
Can you share that with us?
This is online.
Oh.
Yeah, this one, if you Google it, is, yeah, Strong Fiscal Futures. It's really well put together. So that'll relaunch, as well as a committee on short-term rentals, which is also launched. And a couple weeks ago, I was in Edmonton attending the Rural Alberta Municipalities Conference, which was quite interesting because, as you may know, there's a movement where areas of the West, mainly rural places, are feeling completely left behind by the federal government and maybe even to a sense to their provincial government as well. And so it was just interesting when you get into conversations, well, you're from BC. And I said, yeah, I'm from BC. And, well, we're not sure if we like BC. I'm like, well, you know, thanks for that, but you feel abandoned. Our poll is the last one to report on the country. At least you have. So when you start breaking into the conversation that way, you start to find some similarities, and that was sort of the whole intent. But anyway, it was a really good time, and I enjoyed being there. So those are some of the highlights. Thank you, Councillor Bateman, for covering off pretty much all of the CRD committees except for one in November, and CPark as well. I'll be back at the board meeting in December, and then next year kicks off. In terms of our budget meeting coming up on December, I'm going to be arriving late to that. Both of my parents have either specialists, and my dad has a CT scan that day, so I have to take them to both of that before I get here. So I will be arriving late. So Councillor McMath will need to commence chairing that, and as soon as I drop them off, then I will be here as soon as I can. It really is going to depend on the timing at the hospital for that day. And I think that's it. So we do have one further item here, I think. Do we not?
Yes.
Yes. So this is a correspondence, and Councillor Bateman had drafted up a response, and that's why it's here. So there was a call from this was from Family Court and Youth Justice Committee, just reporting out on the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. So they were just looking to look at what our various local governments around the region are doing. So Councillor Bateman put together quite a, I think it would be pages of that report.
Well, it's not pages,
Well.
but it's, you know, it's 5 paragraphs.
Oh, okay.
And it cites the Memorandum of Understanding, which is signed first in March 2007, presently under review. the Sooke and South councils have met twice in 2019. And
So thank you very much for drafting that, Counselor, and we'll send that off and you'll see it in the report.
One
Mr.
other thing you
McInnes?
might add to that, our building inspectors are quite proud of this, is some of the First Nations need building permits to access funding for housing, and so we're mentoring them on how to move through that process and hopefully build capacity for them to do their own inspections at some point in time.
That's great. So thank you very much. So for this one, it'll be that council support Councillor Bateman's submission to the annual report, moved by Councillor Logans and seconded by Councillor Beddoes. And that'll become a public document and you'll have it for your record as well.
So sure hope you spell checked it there.
Yeah, I used my machine.
Yes. Okay, all those in favor, opposed, is carried unanimously. And a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Beddoes, seconded by Councillor McMath. All those in favor, opposed, is carried unanimously. Okay.
Well, that was fun tonight, guys.